The November 10th, oh, hold on. Hello. Okay, there we go. The November 10th, 2025 meeting of the Corvallis School Board is now called to order at 6:30 p.m. To support the health and safety of all community members, particularly those who are immunocompromised and their families, the board continues to offer a virtual participation option for board members and district staff. Public comment is available at select meetings, both in person and virtually. Details on how to provide public comment are available on the Corvallis School District website. Tonight's agenda, board packet, and a link to the district's YouTube channel can be found on the school board page of the website. All public meetings are live streamed on YouTube, and recordings are typically posted the following day. Tonight we have all board members in attendance in person. Before we got started on the agenda, we wanted to, since Veterans Day is tomorrow, we wanted to acknowledge our board member colleague Bernie for his service as a veteran, so thank you. As well as any other veterans in the audience are watching online, thank you. And the first, the item on the agenda, because this is a special meeting that was called for further discussion, is on school consolidation deliberation. Do you have stuff to present before we talk?
Yeah, we do. We have a slide deck to present. Again, joining me this evening is Kim Patton, our Director of Facilities, Lauren Wolf, who oversees our finances, and Byron Bethard's, who focuses primarily on curriculum and student growth and experience. And so we just thought that at the end of the conclusion at the last meeting, it would be good to do a little bit of just kind of reminders as you move into your discussion. We've tried to keep the slide numbers small in order for you to have plenty of time for discussion, but felt like that was an important place for us to start this evening. So initially, the thought is, how did we get to this point? And this is not a point that we came to lightly. It has come to us over years of time. Initially, one of the things I want to commend the board for is spending time in community in 22-23 and listening sessions. You held 6 listening sessions to develop the goals for the school board. And at the end of that time, the board adopted 4 goal areas: excellent learning experience, equitable systems, relevant and engaging learning, and healthy communities. And again, we spent the better part of a year collecting that information, and then for you to go ahead and adopt those areas. And for community members, there are a number of actions under each one of those goal areas, but I think that's an important place for us to start. 23 through 25, financial planning. Each one of those years in budget committee, we went through some excruciating challenges and costs. In 23-24, we reduced our budget by $8 million. The next year, 24-25, we reduced our budget by $3 million. And if we go with the status quo proposal at this point in time, we'll be looking at an additional cut of about $4 million. And each one of those times, one of the things that has been difficult about that is that it has impacted programming and the opportunities we've been able to provide. And that has been a critique by the community, understandably so, that we're continuing to lose programming, and that needs to be something that we looked at. And so between April and June of last year, the Long Range Facilities Planning Committee came together. They brought a bunch of data that was collected both by our architects as well as by the information we received around enrollment and birth rates, and all of that information came to us from our demographers, and all that information went together into a report that was shared with you, and I presented that to you at your board retreat in August. At that time, the board made the request for a proposal to come forward. There was a lot of discussion about a proposal coming forward, specifically because the initially in the conversation, it was about bringing 3 proposals forward, and the decision was made by the board to bring a single proposal forward and a couple of examples of proposals that were not brought forward and as to why. And one of the thoughts behind that was trying to limit the way that individual schools felt about other schools in this process, and to not put out schools that would not be considered, and the challenges and the just kind of the overall feelings that would come with that. And so that's why an initial request was brought forward to you in September. Following that proposal, you've asked me to come back with a revised proposal, and that's what I did at the most previous school board meeting that's been held. So again, I just felt like it's important to go back a little bit to talk about how we got to this point and some of the things we've learned along the way, and understanding the challenge that we face. So again, that initial recommendation that I brought to you in September was the creation of K6s at many of our elementaries, with the exception being Mountain View becoming a K8, based on location, capacity, some of those components. Linus Pauling becoming our junior high for 7th and 8th grade students. Also to have the opportunity to build a mascot and a community together. So a modification to the name. The closure of Sheldon. Continuing to use those spaces in Sheldon, like the gyms, because we know community needs those and we don't have enough of them. And then to review the feasibility of the 2 high school district in 28-29, or if enrollment drops below 2025. So that was the initial recommendation that I brought forward. One of the pieces that I've shared with you a couple of times, but I also think it's important to come back to this, is that some of the components in making the decision around a proposal was thinking about a number of factors that influence our community, our school district, and our students, and how do we take those into account as we're working to develop a proposal. One of the things that I could go into about each one of those is that we spent a long period of time discussing each one of these. So it wasn't a short conversation where we went through the whole list. It was conversation after conversation, trying to come up with the best proposal we could. Recently, we've had several proposals come forward from the community that I also think that I want to recognize, because I appreciate community coming forward and saying, have you thought about, would you consider? And one of those, as a great example, is the concept of having Sheldon be the K8 rather than Mountain View. And as I've talked about that with facilities, some of the challenges that come up around that, one is that our elementary schools are typically fenced because we have our youngest students in those spaces. Sheldon is not fenced at this time. We would also have to be thinking about things like playgrounds. Playgrounds are surprisingly expensive, somewhere in the neighborhood of $800,000 to $1 million to put in a playground. When we think about middle schools, we think about our kindergarten and first grade classrooms if they were in a middle school. And in many of our schools, there's restrooms in the classroom for, again, for 5 and 6 year olds. Those are not available currently in Sheldon. We would have to think about how to make that space smaller for some of our youngest students. It's easier with fixtures and shelves and those things for larger kids to use smaller, but harder for smaller kids to use larger. Also thinking about things like transportation. Transporting students that much further into town may not be as significant of a concern for a middle schooler, but for a 6 or 7 year old, that's another consideration. So we've looked at and continue to look at the ideas and suggestions people bring forward, and incorporating those into some of these consideration components. So you asked me to come back with another proposal, one that goes further, which is something that I know you heard during the listening sessions that we held with community, and in that to look specifically at an elementary school. And in looking at an elementary school specifically, the proposal was the closure of Letitia Carson, with students heading to Mountain View, to Garfield, or KJH in the Garfield boundary, as well as Bessie Coleman. And having Catherine Jones Harrison become the Garfield sister school. I know that this is a challenge for our community. I know that this is hard for our board. And I know that this is something that will be deliberated on tonight and debated, but I brought it forward to you based on the request that you made. I'm going to transition to Lauren. Lauren has helped us with the financials, thinking about consolidation a number of times. Tonight, she's going to share with you the 3 proposals and the finances that go along with each of those.
Okay, so this is sort of the inverse of the table that you've seen a few times, but to look at the data in maybe a little bit of a different way. And so obviously with all 3 of the options, we have the same number of kids in the model. And so our projected enrollment for next year will be 5,591 students. In the status quo model, nothing is changing structurally. So we do not reduce any dollar amount through consolidation. We do not reduce any positions through consolidation, and we don't change the amount spent per student through consolidation. So without consolidation, we are left with that budget shortfall of $3.87 million, which would require us to reduce classroom teachers by about 25.8 FTE. And in order to reduce the classroom teachers by that amount, we would have to increase average class sizes on all grades by a minimum of 4 in order to make that work. Then you go to the original initial proposal, and through that, with closing Shuttle and middle school and moving to the K-6 model, we will reduce $1.67 million through consolidation. We reduce 9.42 positions through consolidation. And I do want to point out that those are not all classroom teachers, actually very few classroom teachers. It's mostly other positions that support the operation of a building. And through that process, we reduce the spending per student by $213. Once we do that, we still have a budget shortfall of about $2.2 million. So then at that point, we would need to reduce and our classroom teachers by about 15 classroom teachers, which would be an average increase of 2 to all of our class size targets across all grades. In the revised proposal, through consolidation, we will reduce about $3 million. That's about 18.23 positions. And again, most of that is not classroom teachers. We reduce our per student spending by about $400, and we are left with a budget shortfall of $829,000. That equates to about 5.5 classroom teaching positions, but wouldn't necessarily change our class size targets because that's so few that wouldn't go system-wide. So most likely that dollar amount we can just remove from other spending areas.
Can I make a point about that before we go on? I think this is a important thing to share, and it's also a hard thing to share. When you think about the closure of a school, the positions that are often reduced in the closure of a school, and it's not the people who are in those buildings right now because of seniority and those things, but you typically have one less administrator, you have one less campus steward. It's the positions that support a building that you have to have if you have a building open. But when you close a building, those positions decrease, and that allows us to continue to maintain our teaching staff and address class size. So it's, again, the people in those positions in those buildings, it's not about them because seniority, it won't be them. But as you think about it, I think the biggest thing that's different about reductions and the closure of a school is the positions that you're giving up in that process. And again, it's a hard thing to say because we know that there's people that will be impacted by that, but that's the reality that we need people to understand, the board to understand, because that's, again, one of those pieces that we continue to hear. We have to keep our class sizes down. The way we keep our class sizes down is by school consolidation.
So, can we do this one more time? And just looking at this, when you look at that per pupil amount, that is what Ryan's talking about, is how we create those efficiencies and how the building is operated. And with that dollar amount savings that we would see through consolidation, those are funds that can go back into instruction and future programming. Okay, thanks. And okay, so this is what we have unofficially named Sammy's chart. And so we're going to break it down in a little bit different of a way today. So we have in the far left column the building capacity. So that's just straight number of individuals that can be in the building. We want to look at our target capacity, our utilization, which we have set by level. So when we look at that, for example, for elementary, our target is to have the building be 90% full. So that's how we've adjusted that number. Then we want to adjust our capacity for districts level programs. And so that looks like our life skills. We have DLI and SEG, different district level programs at elementary that then are reduced from that number. And so you can see in sort of that middle, the 26-27 status quo projected enrollment, you can see what that number is. And you can see that that puts our percent utilization at 57%. But when we adjust in the far right column for our target, we want that column, you can see in red, target, we want that to be 100%. That means we're using 100% of the 90%. Is that, okay. So that we adjusted that column there. So that's our goal, is for all of those numbers to be as close to 100% as we can. That means that we're using the space in which it was designed to be used for students. Next slide, please. Okay, now we add on to, this is with the revised proposal, those numbers there. And you can see that when we do that, we then get much closer to that 100%. So I'm looking at the column that says 26-27 proposal utilization with capacity adjustment. Do you see there? And at our elementary schools, we end up being overall at 71%. At the K-8s, we're at full utilization. At middle school, we're pretty close at 94% utilization. So that is the target. I know that there has been concern about what does a school at 100% look like, and I want to remind people that it's 100% of the 90%, which is the recommendation of utilization for the space. And how, like, for example, Bessie Coleman and Lincoln, as our brand new schools, when they were built, we built them with specific target capacities based on best practice in educational design. And so we are looking to get those numbers as close as possible to 100%. With that saying, we do have a 10% buffer for any bubbles of student cohorts that come through.
So when our schools are closer to that 100% utilization, what that means is there's more students in the spaces as they've been designed to be. And that means that the more teaching staff follow that number of students. And when our schools, particularly elementary, are denser with the student population, when we're at a higher rate of utilization, that means there's more staffing that follows. And when there's more staffing, there's more possibilities because staff isn't stretched thin or split between multiple buildings or reduced down in their time. And so there's more capacity of staff to do more things that are innovative and work across things than they would when they're stretched really thin doing multiple roles in a school. And so the first thing I want to say, though, is what continues with consolidation. So there's some things that just stay true all the time in public education that don't change. And so across every single school in Corvallis, we will always serve and continue to serve special education in the way that we have. And so every school has a population of special education. Every school has special education case managers and assistants and specialists, and that will continue at all schools across our district. That doesn't go away. All of our schools are pretty close in similarities between their special ed services, and so that's something that doesn't change. The other thing that doesn't change is our family advocate program, which you heard about earlier this year, and our mental health programs and our counseling programs. Those things stay consistent with kids. We have students who qualify under McKinney-Vento, which helps students and families who are navigating poverty or homelessness. That's in place at all of our schools. That stays in place at all of our schools through consolidation. The other thing that stays in place for some of our schools is Title I. So Title I, we have like school-wide Title I programs. They're not targeted. Targeted might mean it serves a smaller population within the school. Our schools are school-wide, which means all students in that school receive support through Title I, and that comes in a monetary form that helps with usually extra staffing and parent education. And so that follows where students go. And so we have 4 Title I schools in Corvallis right now. And those types of services or that funding doesn't go away if a school closes, but it follows and goes where students go. It might change where those locations of Title I schools are, but it doesn't go away with consolidation. And those are in place across our whole district. So thinking about what consolidation makes possible, in the revised proposal, when there's higher density like we just talked about in schools, when staff can be increased in schools, it makes quite a few things possible that we haven't been able to do for quite some time. I calculated, I think this is my 17th year in our district. I remember a time when blends weren't really a thing, and then because of our reduction in our budgets, have started to become more almost like pretty equal in a lot of our schools of just a straight grade level or a blended grade level. And so in a consolidation, when we've looked at our numbers, it pretty much makes possible at the elementary level not to have blended classrooms. And that's a positive thing this makes possible. It also makes possible for less splits between specialists, between buildings, which is a hardship, I know, on our specialists to learn 2 school cultures. I know we've heard from our library and media techs about that. We've heard that from our music specialist and our PE specialist and our art specialist. And so again, when the density of schools have increased, staff can remain more holistic in a building and really support that building well. The other part that this helps us do that makes us possible is to be rethinking in a rigorous and innovative way how we do our grade level configurations. And we've talked about that with our K4 band, the band of a 5th, 6th grade, and making 5th and 6th grade that blended model of both what we know are the best features of middle school and the best features of elementary school together. And in that, we believe we can offer more robust and rigorous learning experiences for 5th and 6th grade as well that include access to specials and electives in a different way than we would in a K4 model too. It also helps us strengthen our pathways for CTE programs at the high school by re-envisioning what a 7th and 8th junior high looks like and how those can help prepare students at a high level to start to make choices so that they are prepared when they enter into high school and 9th grade about what they might want to try out in a pathway to be ready for the future. So those are just a few things. When the revised proposal came out, that kind of opened the door to a lot more possibilities than we thought were possible before because of the restrictions around budget.
So again, we just wanted to set the stage for you to have a little bit more information. We're here to answer questions that you may have, but we also know that last time you ran out of time to be able to have that discussion, and that's really the intention of the meeting tonight. So again, we'll be here to answer questions folks have, but also want to make sure there's plenty of time for you to talk as a board.
Thanks, Ryan and team, for those reminders. I had a couple things before we started deliberating that I wanted to go over as well. The first thing I wanted to do is say thank you to the community members and staff and students that have gone out of their way to meet with board members. We've been spending a lot of time in conversation with you all, and we really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us, talk on the phone with us, send us messages. So I just want to say thank you. And I also wanted to thank the Save Corvallis Schools Coalition for the survey that you sent us that had a lot of information. So we do surveys as well, and you asked questions maybe that we didn't ask, and so we appreciated you taking the time to send that in as well. What I wanted to share for fellow board members is I appreciated seeing the synopsis or the overview of where we have been and where we came from, and that's something I've been thinking about as well over the last few weeks, and thinking about at each level of those budget cuts across 3 years. We've heard community members share what's important to them, what's important to save, what makes Corvallis School special to them, how awesome the staff are, which is true, and what they hope we preserve and what we can try to retain through these budget cuts. And we've heard that over and over again throughout the past few years. And so some of those things are programs like that we've heard about, art and music. We've heard about libraries and media, as it was already explained. We've also heard things about rigor and how they feel like teachers aren't able to dedicate the time for the students. We've heard about classes that students wish they still had that they don't have anymore. And so I just wanted us to think about all of those things that have come along the way. And we have heard testimony from community. We've heard testimony from students across all grade levels and staff pleading with us to preserve what we have here in Corvallis education the best we can. And I don't want to forget that in these conversations that have led us to where we're at now, where we're like, we have to do something else because we can't keep doing this with the budgets every single year. And I think that's important for us to remember. And also when we, it became almost like a fiscal responsibility when we seen the proposal and heard back from community where we're like, actually though, we're going to ask you to do something really hard, Ryan. Can you add an elementary school in particular to this mix? Because we've seen what was coming ahead, because we've been living through it as a board every year with the staff and with the community with the budget cuts. And so we did ask for that to come in. Not a high school. We didn't ask for that. We didn't ask for a KA. We asked for an elementary school. And so I think that's important for us to remember too, from that fiscal responsibility part, that was informed by priorities of years of hearing from the community and from staff and students. The other thing I wanted to acknowledge was the work that went behind the slides. I know you showed us you wanted to keep it short, show us a few slides. Each one of those squares on that one slide is probably hours worth of conversations and going over information. There's some things I know that community has asked for from us that can never be disclosed. Like we don't have access to some of the information because of privacy laws. We all like privacy laws. We don't want our information about our own families out there, right? And so there's information that we will never see that have to do with income status, that have to do with people's racial backgrounds, their abilities and disabilities that are part of these conversations that I think is important for us to keep in mind as a board as well. When we're discussing. And that reminder from the last process, when we were at the conference presenting on this, and I heard Kim tell the story again about the last process and heard from folk that were involved with that process that are in the community or that are staff, and how hard that was when there was the pitting of the schools against each other through these multiple proposals. And that reminded me of why we only asked for one, because I was like, why did we only ask for one again? And I was like, oh yeah, that was part of it. And then another thing that I wanted to remind the board is that we're a district-wide board. We do not represent zones. And so that means that for community members, that means that it doesn't matter where we live in town or what connections we might have to different parts of town or different schools in our personal or professional lives or anything like that. We have to represent the whole district. We can't represent one part of the district. And so we have to think holistically, and I think that's important for us to remember too. And then the last thing I wanted to say before we started in deliberation, I swear it's the last thing. I usually don't talk this long, but for the pre-part, is that I don't view the lack of engagement from the community in other board matters beyond the budget or consolidation as that you all don't care, because you do care. I viewed it as you all have a lot of trust in what's going on. And right now it feels like something hard is happening. And so it has piqued a lot of interest from the community for good reason. And so I don't think that people didn't care before, and I want you all to hear that from the board, that we know you care, and we know that staff care, and we know students care, and families do. And so the lack of engagement over the previous months, I don't think was coming from that. I do think you guys do, and it felt for me as a board member more like a reminder that you all trust us to make these hard decisions and to have conversations with you. And so I appreciate the community stepping up and saying that they want to help, not just in this moment, but beyond. And so I just wanted to add that in as well. So we have 59 minutes and about probably 1 million questions. No, we don't have 1 million. I have 10, but I'm not going to get to all my questions probably. So just like I had to limit public comment at meetings, I have to limit my questions. But do you have a question about process? One at a time.
Yes, I do.
Or one topic?
One topic at a time. So
Yeah.
I want to actually suggest if we can have our questions and deliberation followed one topic at a time. And when we feel like we have consensus or agreement to disagree on a topic, then we move on to another topic if that's acceptable for the board. And I would like to suggest a question for Ryan and you, the chair. Thank you for sharing the process of how we got here. But I think it's important to also maybe reflect on some information we talked about before about the process, how we move forward from a decision is being made, just for us to know what's the timeliness of the decision making. If a decision is made in November, what kind of milestones operationally or even board decisions that we need to be aware of. Some of it we talked about in the past couple of months between now and the start of the school year.
I think that's part of the questions people have.
Okay.
I know that's
sorry.
part of my questions
Yes.
about timeline stuff.
Okay.
And so maybe, is that somewhere we want to start with as a board on topics, or do we want to go question by question for process? Topics?
I'll just say that the timeline is, of all of the topics that we could discuss, is the one that feels the most obvious to me. And so I don't personally need to start there, but if other folks want to dive into that, it's fine. I feel like the documents we've received so far have made a pretty compelling case for why the district is proposing the timeline that they are.
Go ahead, Shauna. And Judah, whoever wanted to go first.
So I appreciate what you shared, Therese, and also I think related to timeline though, and if this is not the right moment for this question, are the consequences or the impact of a delayed timeline as being important in that conversation around timeline, because I know that that's something we've heard from the community is a request for slowing down timeline. And so understanding, if we're thinking about timeline, what's been shared by the district in terms of these are really helpful, or these are critical milestones that we need to be able to make these decisions on this timeline for these later impacts, that might be worth bringing back up.
You're already talking about timelines, so if you have questions about that, I would just go ahead and ask them so we can move on to another topic too. But try to keep in mind that there is a lot of information, like Teresa's saying, about timelines. So I appreciate your framing, because mine was more around that too. So go ahead, Bernie.
Yeah, I do have a question for Ryan about timeline, but it's not this immediate timeline. I'm looking a little bit farther. So Ryan, do you feel this plan to be inclusive of everything? Do you feel good about this plan, your revised plan? How far will it go? The reason I'm asking is because I think we should look at the entering class next year, the kindergartners, and really look out 12 years. One thing I did learn from the budget process is that this gap, the deficit gap, is going to increase and the student population is going to decrease. So my sense is there's going to be additional consolidations that need to happen. Can we come up, do you think it makes more sense to do it all at once to make say, CSD 2038 plan?
I'm not Ryan, but I'll answer that one. So from a financial perspective, I know that it's hard to settle with this, but K-12 finance and operations is very different than private sector. We are not able to generate revenue for ourselves. We are not in the business of generating revenue. Okay, and then the second thing is we are funded on a biennium. So the state allocates us money every 2 years. If you have recently heard, ODE has just gone through a reduction exercise to look at what it would be to cut mid-biennium 2.5 to 5% in the current biennium. So money that we have already planned on receiving potentially may be taken away. I know that there is a desire to look at a financial plan that is 10 years long, and I can tell you that there's too many variables. We have no idea the amount of funding that we will receive from the state, from the federal government. We can look at enrollment trends, but if we know the kinders that will be here in 4 years, because we get that data 1 year after the fact, and so we can look at that information. But making a financial plan that is more than the current biennium plus another one, it doesn't make a lot of sense because of how many different pieces. Not only does the state school fund change on a biennium, it changes based on what other districts are doing. So currently, they say there's around 668,000 kids in the system, and we get a piece of that depending on how many of those kids are ours. So for example, say GAPS loses kids and our kids stay the same. Well, now we get more per student, right? But if GAPS, and I'm just using them as an example, it has nothing to do with locality, but GAPS or another district in the state now has more students, now we get less per student. And so I understand the desire to do that, and it would be really inaccurate, and I don't think it's the best use of our time. That is why we stick to doing models that are really focused on the current biennium, and depending on where we are, year 1 or year 2. But the most I would ever say that I would be would have enough level of accuracy would be 5 years at the maximum. And even that, when I said that to our accounting manager, she got really nervous because with her understanding of how we are funded, it just doesn't make sense. And we have to be prepared to react to all of those different variables at any time. Does that answer your question?
Actually, I have a follow-up for Byron. Now, how is that going to impact you? Because you are planning something that is going to last 12 years, right? So this timeline, our programming timeline.
So is your question like, how does that impact how programming functions?
No, how your programs can be sustained over time if halfway through there's going to be a lot of uncertainty, perhaps even another round of consolidation or cuts.
Mm-hmm. So I think not to be confused programming with curriculum, right? And so the work that we're doing is not looking at expenditures or changing curriculum and what we're putting into classrooms. It's actually looking about what's the vision and how we use existing resources and staffing within that to shift our practice in that vision. And so that is sustainable in and of itself because it's not adding in new things. It's looking at what we currently have in place and re-envisioning how that looks. And so, like, for example, like with our, like, let's say for like 5th and 6th grade teachers, we have that staff in place. And so it's re-envisioning how is their time spent in that's aligned with the vision of that 5th and 6th grade band. So in that, the ideas that are coming out right now from innovation team are thinking about 5th and 6th grade teachers teaching content instead of teaching a homeroom style. So that means there could be a 5th grade teacher that teaches humanities twice a day to 2 groups of students. That is a different program that doesn't require different resources. It just shifts how people are using their time and what they're doing. So that's sustainable through that and looking at that differently.
Thank you.
One more piece, Bernie, that I just want to mention. Going through that activity would require us to bring someone in to help us. Right now, we are in a place where we're getting ready to go into negotiations with our Teachers Association, which is always a heavy lift. Whatever the board decides around consolidation, we will be working to implement that for next school year. And there's so many factors in that if there's the board is requesting something like that, I would encourage you to think about having someone support that work because of the capacity that our team has. As you know, we've made reductions at the district office over the last couple of years, and I just don't see the capacity to do that this winter and spring.
Thank you.
I had my question about, does somebody else have a timeline? Go ahead. I'll go after.
So is there any wiggle room around this November 13th decision? Because I have concerns that we put forth this initial Sheldon proposal, and there was about 3 more weeks and 2 more listening sessions that we had available for reactions and hearing from the community about Sheldon, whereas Letitia Carson, we kind of brought it in and they just had this one listening session right at the very tail end, and there was a unequal amount of time allocated to hearing from the community.
Can I just ask mine, because it's kind of related but asked differently? Mine is more, it's like about similar, however, I worded it more like the board doesn't oversee operations at all. But so my question that's related to what you just asked is like, if we added a couple of weeks or if we added a couple of months, how would that impact operationalizing? Because I think that's like in the operations of the district. Would it be, is that kind of similar to what you're saying, right? But you're asking like, is there wiggle room? But mine specifically, like, is there wiggle room because of these things?
I think it does clarify. I'm interested in seeing if it would significantly impact operationalizing any plan if we provided more time and added more listening
So we're
sessions.
asking the same thing.
Yeah.
So 2 questions at one time. We're asking the same thing, basically.
So I would say that if you go much beyond November 13th, it's not going to be possible to implement that for the upcoming school year. You would have to be thinking about if it's something that you want to postpone for a school year. And the reason why I think that holds true is because we have done backwards planning in order to get people information about where they're going to be next school year by the late part of February, prior to spring break, prior to a job fair. We have to, and so for employees, I'm concerned about pushing it unless we push it real far.
That makes sense. That's why I was asking, like, from a standpoint of like to operationalize, because I know there's so many pieces that the board doesn't help with that has to do with staffing, and I think probably Chris is the only one that understands that better than any of us because she used to be staff. But so decisions impact where people are, from what I understand. So that's kind of.
I had a conversation with a colleague of mine who just went through consolidation in their school district, and he felt like November 13th was a pretty late date for us to make a decision for the upcoming school year based on his experience. Anything you two want to add, because I know you've done the backwards planning?
I think for us to work on the innovation piece and like our profile of a graduate, we're working on those pieces through innovation. But that's all our innovation work is driven around teachers and our staff, and we have upcoming breaks in between things where folks aren't working. And so to have information to then get feedback on from community, from all staff, from all buildings, is a real limited timeline that I have backwards planned to have enough feedback and information for our innovation team to do that work from like winter break up, so that we can start looking at, because that drives part of our staffing and how we support people with endorsements and choices on where they might want to go, because it's different for a 6th grade teacher who's been teaching 6th grade at a middle school moving to a K6, and they might have a desire to teach in a homeroom style where they teach every subject all day long, or that could be a big change and they might want to teach a subject that they specialize in a couple times throughout that day. And so that also is a factor in that helps inform staffing.
Did that answer your question? Because it answered mine. Okay. Teresa and Sammy.
So I first want to just make sure I'm checking my understanding, both with you and with fellow board members. So if we were to extend a couple of weeks, which would compromise your timeline as you're describing it, I guess a question / concern or something for consideration that I'm having is that if we give ourselves the extra couple of weeks, what are we hoping we would come out of that time? Are we hoping that we would come up with a different proposal? I guess my concern about a different proposal would then be, what happens if we come up with a different proposal that impacts a different set of schools or communities who will then want the same amount of time for the opportunity to have listening? So I'm trying pragmatically to think about, is it possible with adding any wiggle room at all, or even really right now since it's the 10th, is it possible from your perspective to create a different plan that still reduces the budget deficit significantly, but somehow leads us to a different outcome than closing an elementary school, and particularly closing Letitia Carson? Or if we say we're not going to make a decision by the November 13th, or let's say we get the extra week or two, that we are basically by default, we are deciding that we are not going to go forward with the closure of an elementary school this year. Does that question make sense? It's for you, but also I'm trying to understand from the board, what is your understanding of what we would be deciding, or what we would be setting in motion if we decide that we want to have more time?
That's a great question.
Yeah, I think that what I would say is that if you're going to push the date back very far, then you really start to have to, then you really need to start thinking about a year later. I don't think you can wait too long. I definitely don't think that we should be having this conversation in January about the following September.
And commenting on somehow if a different proposal that involved a different school were to rise to the surface, how would you feel about the capacity for us to engage the community on a timeline that could feel meaningful for the community and still give you the time that you would need to do the work that you need to do?
I'd be concerned.
Sammy, then Bernie.
Thank you. And is it okay to incorporate the comments as well
Yeah.
on timeline?
Yeah.
Yes. So I think the summary of the discussion here gives me a little bit of assurance that the timeline we committed to is a timeline that seems appropriate to making a decision. And I'm saying that regardless what the decision looks like, whether no consolidation using one of the two proposals, or modification to the proposal, understanding that we're at the critical points that we have designed by design no later than November in order to do it. I just want to reinforce a couple of other milestones. We have school improvements plans that look for this school year and also the following school year, informs your budgeting process, informs your staffing. There's probably interaction between school improvements plan and innovation team findings and recommendations. The school improvements plans are going to be due late November, early December, based on level. Then you have reorganization in terms of staffing who may need to have licensing. Then you need to have notices of renewal or non-renewal by no later than March. And I believe there's obligation to us to make those notices by no later than March, either through CBAs or through law, correct?
Yeah, through law.
Through law. So by March, we need to make those notices. By April, you need to propose a budget for us. That definitely depends what kind of consolidation looks like. And then by May, we need to vote on a budget. The budget committee needs to vote on recommending a budget that we approve in June. And then you need to make sure that you are well-trained, recertified, and ready to operate for the new school year. that really aligns with the decision making that we need to decide no later than there. So I just want to opine. If there's any more accuracy to what I said, please share it. If not, I feel that I'm committed to the timeline, regardless of how the decision will look like. We need to decide whether we need to make $4 million in cuts from other things or completely programs, or preserve programming through consolidation through one of the proposals or a modification to one of the proposals. So that's where I want to make sure that we're aligned on that before we debate on what follows the timeline, whatever substance to the proposals. So I just want to give staff an opportunity. Is there anything inaccurate or more delineation of the timeline moving forward?
I would say from the operational side, there's all of the physical moving that the operations team would have to do to get the buildings ready to potentially receive a different or larger group of kids. So
Thank you.
Is there any other questions on the timeline before we move on? Oh, go ahead, Shauna.
Just had a quick one that I don't think has come up here, but that I've heard in other conversations that I've had over the last couple of weeks, just with staff, with district administrators as well, in terms of the impact on when staff would actually find out what this meant for them. It sounded like kind of final consideration if the November 13th date was met for any decisions that happen for next year, that I'm just looking for confirmation that they would likely find out or kind of be settled in what the shifts were by March. Is that or late March? Is that accurate in terms of what I've heard?
We're shooting for late February, early March. Again, thinking about things like job fairs and some of those other pieces. And also just one of the things that you all know, because you've done this before, is that these processes are so iterative. So when we make an offer to somebody to go someplace, they may decide that's great. They may decide that they want to find a position somewhere else. We continue to have some degree of shifting all the way up to the beginning of the school year. And that's why we even hold off on a couple of FTE and hiring, looking at where the high numbers are. So yes, we are committed to doing that, and things will continue to happen. We've seen that the last couple of years when we've had to do layoffs and
Thank you.
recalls.
I think those are some of the things behind the scenes that folks don't always realize, and I think we don't always realize either as a board, in terms of all of these moving parts that rely on these decisions and when they happen. So thank you.
And
We
that happens every year, not just this year because of consolidation. This is like normal operations of a school district. I think is really important for people to understand.
But we
Like-
have been really intentional in
Yeah.
the planning of this year
Yeah.
to actually move up that timeline of when we can notify staff and when we will start working on staffing, because we know that there's a lot of anxiety from our staff. And so I met with HR last week, I think, and we walked back our timeline and moved it up as close as soon as we can, which ended up being a few more weeks, which is a big lift on the internal teams to get that done.
Go ahead, Chris.
Well, first then, is our Jennifer gonna stay a little bit longer and help us through this, because this is gonna be big. Also with timeline, the thinking about it all is, this is not just affecting, I know it's kind of been said, but I guess I just want to reemphasize that it's gonna snowball, right? And so it's all across the district. I know people at Adams are concerned about where they're going to be or if they're going to be. And so it's not just 2 schools we're talking about, we're talking all across the district, which is huge. So just thinking about that with thinking about timeline.
Okay, I want to do a time check for board members and thinking about how we're framing things and length of time if you feel like this is a good pace, because we're at 35 minutes and we asked about one topic. So I just want to make sure like we're able to talk about other topics that board members are hoping we talk about. So if we can move on from timeline, I think that'd be very helpful.
I propose we talk about finances a little bit more.
Finances.
I would like to talk about title services.
I have title services.
Topics?
Yeah, we're looking for topics. What other topics do we have? I have
High school. Oh,
I
sorry.
have high school too. I also have very specific asks about both high school and the name. So that's another topic.
And can we extend our time? I know it says 8 o'clock, but.
Oh,
this-
tonight?
yeah.
Yes, one of our board members has to be excused at a specific time this evening, but we can
The
stay
rest of
longer
us.
if the rest of us, and if staff is able to stay as well, because this is an extra meeting this evening, and we have a long meeting, so I want to be mindful of that. What other topics?
Capacity and programming, or capacity.
Capacity, other topics? I have also transfer requests,
Transportation.
transportation. Can we combine any, what do we want to start with? Here we go. Yeah.
I feel like I'm not quite ready to talk about next steps, but it's kind of part of the timeline, and I know we're moving on, but like I really want to talk about people and kids, you know, and what we're going to do. But I don't know if that may be a conversation after decisions are made, but,
What do you mean, people and kids?
well, just process. If we do close a school, let's talk about how we're going to help our kids get through this and our staff. You know, is there a timeline? And also, like, I have lots of ideas about how some steps that can be taken, but that's kind of after we make a decision. So I don't know where to put that, but I just want to make that set somewhere.
Thank you. Okay.
Can I?
I have go ahead.
Maybe I want to really merge really good thoughts from Chris. Maybe the last topic we could discuss today is, for lack of better words, operationalizing the decision and oversight. So what's the role of the board in operationalizing whatever decision is made, and of course the district will give us reports, what kind of updates or reports we expect from them. Is that what, Chris, you're looking
I
forward to?
prefer we do not use the word operationalize ever related to board stuff, because it'll be
Correct.
very confusing for the community. I understand what you're saying, but if we can frame it a different way, like, what role does the board have in next steps, or is that maybe
Ye-
something along those lines with that?
Yeah, board
Okay.
role and next steps.
Okay, because I just don't want it to get conflated, yeah, because, yeah. I have a request for us, since we have student reps, and you all are welcome, as you know, to chime in at any time, just like everybody else at the other board meetings, in case they want to chime in on the high school one. Can we start? Because that seems like may not take as much discussion either. Did you
Sure.
want to start, Shauna, and then I'll go?
Okay, so I know in both of the proposals right now, there's a line in there around, and I probably won't have the exact wording, but just around exploring or looking at the feasibility of 2 high schools in 28 or 29, or when the student population reaches a certain level. And we've been hearing, I know I've been hearing from the community, worries of, does this mean in 28, 29, there will all of a sudden be this need to once again consolidate? An announcement would come that one school, whichever is the smallest, which folks are pointing to as Crescent Valley, or that worry, and then all of a sudden Crescent Valley will be closed. And we've heard from students who have brought forward ideas around boundary shifts to really look at how do we, bring up the population at Crescent Valley to try and preserve a school that feels very special, that has a unique culture, that has a lot of wonderful programs. And I really appreciated being invited to speak with Core Council this week. I know Teresa and I had a chance, and I know Lou and Judah have also gone and spoken with Core Council, and maybe other board members as well. And we had a really nice conversation in thinking about what does consolidation at the high school level actually mean? What could it mean? Does it have to mean closing down one high school, which I also hear from parents that there's a lot of worry if we go through consolidation now, and if your child was at Letitia Carson, then went to maybe even another elementary school, depending on the grade this year, then went to Linus Pauling, then went to CV, and all of a sudden there's a closure there and you're shifting again and that's unexpected. Could we, instead of talking about feasibility of a 2 high school model in 28, 29, instead think about that language of creating a strategic vision and plan of what streamlining high schools would look like. And some of the ideas that I've heard come from students as well as others in the community have been things that are already happening. So there is some consolidation already happening. I really appreciate Nikki McFarland for sending me some numbers today, that there are already 190 students dual enrolled across both high schools who are taking 33 different courses, AP courses, CTE, DLI, music, world language, who are going back and forth to get those needs met because there aren't enough students sometimes who need a particular course at one high school. And so what we're already seeing is some consolidation at the high school level. And I've heard some creative rumblings at the district too around, well, consolidation may not mean closing down a site. It may mean really streamlining what's offered at each site so that long-term, maybe at some point you don't need 2 full sets of administrative teams, but you need one overarching principal and an administrator or an assistant principal at each site or other kinds of models where consolidation is happening through that, but each of those sites really gets to leverage some of their skills and strengths, like CV having these great CTE programs and an early childhood that I know has expanded and been very popular there. I know CHS has ones too. Arts and music and theater at CHS, these are just ideas coming up. But thinking about the value of developing, rather than saying, we'll wait for consolidation, wait for conversation in 28, 29, changing the language now to say, we'll start. And a student engaged process of looking at what does really intentional continued streamlining of high schools and the programs across them look like for that vision. So that was just.
Can I just go, because it's very similar, and mine's less, because I don't want to get into details of what's possible, because I don't think we're there yet at all, but.
And sorry, I was just kind of like.
I know we've had like conversations with students and there's ideas from community floating around too. But my ask was more, can we revise that section a little bit just to specify that next steps before the board discusses consolidation will include involvement with students from all high schools, because it's not just CV that would be impacted. It would also be CHS, and we also have College Hill students. And so more along something that just signifies through this process that there's engagement with the students from all the schools for next steps that are going to help inform board conversations next. Did that make sense? That was a lot of words about the same thing, probably.
No, that makes sense, and that's also something that I've had feedback on, is that it felt like nothing was going to happen until 28, 29, and I agree that we need to continue to talk about it. Right now, with our high school administrators, we're working on making sure that classes, they're almost building a single master schedule for next year. Not exactly, but looking at when courses are offered in case students want to take them and they don't have access in their schedule at their home high school. So we are continuing to move in that direction. At CV, we've continued to improve spaces. We've improved our health occupation space this past year. The year prior, we did the culinary space. We're going to need those spaces. And I think we need to start to talk about what does that look like conceptually. And we want to, and I don't think we should, I agree, I don't think we should wait.
Okay, so I think if it's just specified, that would help alleviate some of the concerns around why are we waiting, something's going to happen, can we be involved in the conversation? Just even revising it a tiny bit, what I think would help with that, be more legible to the community and for students. Does that sound okay to everybody? Sammy?
Yeah, I agree. Also, probably measurable and actionable plan. I'm not sure if we should say by that date or by that population we should have a ready plan, but maybe revising the language that gives us also commitments that we will work on a plan, and here's a milestone where the board will receive an update. I'm not sure what that looks like, whether we want to commit to 28, 29, but definitely updates annually.
So you're going to make a motion in the near future So I would encourage you to think about the language that you would want to use. I will try to draft something, but again, this is you're the ones that are taking action. And if you don't like the language that I come up with, it is within your prerogative and scope to change it.
Should we email that to you then?
That would be helpful.
Yes.
Okay. Maybe we can work on that.
Can I? Sorry, go ahead.
Can I add one thing to that? To not just to remember that we have students who are high schoolers in our Bridges program as well, to include them in that because they've had different lived experiences maybe than some students at our other high schools, and they are in a different model that they have found to be successful for them.
Thanks, Byron. That's I forgot about that part. That's why I said all high schools. That way it wasn't just narrowing it down. So thank you for that important reminder. Words matter. Okay.
Can I add one more thing or two more things?
On the high
quickly?
schools? Or
Yeah, on the
are we
high
ready to
schools.
move on? Okay.
That's inspired me to think of those who are going to be impacted by any potential shifts. So the middle schoolers as well, being part of this conversation, they are going to be attending whatever envisioning that we want to do. So I would recommend that as well, if we see that's valuable.
We have surveyed about 250 high school students already about what their middle school experiences were like and what they would want to keep the same or improve, that we'll use with our innovation team for some of that work.
Wonderful, thank you. Last but not least, I want to put it out there. It's not something I want to explore now, but if it has been explored, I would love to hear. The 7 through 12 in one campus model, I heard some suggestions from community members. That's have we explored it? And I heard some pushback from community members not supporting it. And I'm wondering if that's something that we had any data or feedback through the instruments that we used to measure community preferences.
In that stoplight report that we presented to the board, the biggest concern about it, the benefit was one less transition. The concern about it was 7th grade age students with seniors in high school, and that's sort of those developmental stages, both of social emotional development as well as learning, and some concerns about that. So I think we marked it as yellow. If memory serves, it's been a while since we developed that, but those were the considerations that went into that.
Thank you, Ryan. Just want to elevate that as something we discussed. I don't want to move us any further.
Okay. Next topic was, Laura, I'm sorry. Nobody has to leave at 8. It's 8:30.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine.
I just want to add to the conversation. I feel like it's great that we're planning for the future, but right now, because of the population difference, we are experiencing resource disparity like right now. And because right now, if we have requests like for a class at CV, and then it can't be it's not for like a full class. Usually we would have that class at CHS, and it's like this resource disparity, I wish we could address it now. I wish we could, within these 3 years, students at CV are not gonna get the same quality education as CHS their students gonna get. And so is there something we can do for these 3 years, ensure the students at CV that the high schoolers now, they still wanna come to CV within these 3 years?
I think we need more conversation about what the specific asks are, because what I'm hearing from Shauna is that there's a lot of going across campus back and forth. So I haven't heard from CHS students if they're experiencing some things like you are, because the numbers are dropping all across the board too. And so I think I don't know how we should go enter that conversation, I guess I should say, or if it fits within a consolidation conversation, or if that's a separate conversation. So that's what that's why I'm sitting here thinking. I'm just explaining my thinking phase. So, yeah. Yes.
So, in Mrs. McFarland sharing those numbers with me, I know that she also noted that she'll be meeting with principals of each school to talk about what does some of those sharing of classes look like for next year, I believe in December. And so I wonder if that would be a conversation to bring to her as well. in preparation for some of the planning that'll be happening for next year. That might be something to bring up with her as well outside of the board, since it's more operational around that. So just a thought in knowing that some of those conversations are coming up for next year planning.
And I would just add, a lot of that actually is less about resource disparity and more about what classes students forecast and want to take. I looked at data on what groups, like what schools, or what were the popular things that students forecasted for, and both schools have different levels of what students were interested in. And the financial side of that is we don't have a teacher teaching a class of 5 or 6 students. Just like at the university level, there may be considerations that way. And so a lot of that also comes into student interests and student bodies and what students forecast for to make those decisions.
Okay. So it sounds like we can go ahead and, that sounds like the operational convo with Nikki then, perhaps, to give the feedback. Thank you for raising that, Laura. I think we have what topic do we want to do the title, since that was the next? Okay. Judah?
So Mountain View is already a Title I school, but Bessie Coleman has, I think, the second lowest population of children who live in poverty that go there now. The students that are expected to transfer from Letitia Carson to Catherine Jones Harrison, which has a much higher population, or Bessie Coleman, are any of those students going to be missing the title funding that they currently receive at Letitia Carson by going to one of those 2 elementary schools?
So when we look at the numbers, so your question is, like, what would they be receiving, or would they receive less support than they receive now at their current school? Is that kind of the phrasing that?
Well, my concern is that they'll be going from a Title I elementary school to something that will not then turn into a Title I elementary school.
Mm-hmm. So what? Yeah, go ahead.
So I'll start and then Byron can finish. So as we look at where our students would be attending if the board was to adopt that proposal, it's likely that one of our other elementary schools would become a Title I school. So we'd continue to have 4 Title I schools if that were to take place. Title dollars come to the district level, and then they're allocated in that school-wide model. There have been some instances where they've been able to make some exceptions in working with the Department of Education. One example recently has been Adams. We've had more students that have transitioned to Adams who were newcomers to the country. And based on the number of newcomers, Amy Leeson, who organizes our title program, was able to allocate additional resources to that school, recognizing that that need was there. So the majority of students would be heading towards a school that would become a Title I school, and they'd be receiving the school-wide services. And then we continue to look at examples of need where we need to address it through the work we do with the Department of Education and what the allowables are under that federal grant. My concerns about Title I that I've shared before are less about local decision-making around Title I. My greater concerns is about federal decision-making around Title I services. We know that we are going to receive fewer title programming dollars based on the budget at the federal level. We saw that with our migrant students. They didn't allocate dollars there in the next budget. Title II, which provides professional development to our staff, there's no allocation there as well. And so I'm concerned about our ability overall to provide title services based on the federal landscape way more than the local landscape.
But just to clarify, it's not Bessie Coleman or Catherine Jones Harrison that are projected to turn into Title I schools.
One of those would.
Which one?
Can I add some numbers to the mix with your question?
Yeah.
So when I looked at the numbers, all but one of our schools, I sent this out for a board just so they had the same information in advance of me rattling off numbers. But all but one of our schools are within a few percentages of students navigating poverty. And so what that says to me is that this is a citywide situation here of students navigating poverty. In some of the schools, to me, I had questions about how is that one a Title I school if it has the same percentage as another school that's not a title school. So I think it would be helpful to hear like how that designator happens to help figure out like which one it would be. And I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but I think it was Catherine Jones Harrison was at 32, but the rest are at 34, 36, 39, which is not that much. And just to help people understand what those numbers mean, with Letitia Carson at 39 and Garfield at 36, that's 8 students when you do the math. It's not like 20 students. It's a small amount of number of students. And so knowing that with Catherine Jones Harrison being a school, my curiosity, I don't want to try to figure out where the students navigating poverty are either, because I think that's not fair, because you can accidentally, that was my warning in the beginning. I don't want to assume something around somebody's socioeconomic status, which is protected data. And so I think it's a hard ask to say which one of the schools until we see where they land, because we don't know like the board doesn't know which students from which parts are going to go to that school, like their socioeconomics. The district might know, but I don't know if that might complicate the ask you're asking, because you want to know which school.
I guess my concern is I also looked at all those numbers, and we had a conversation before about looking at that. The Bessie Coleman is at 15%.
Yeah.
And we have a number of students going from Letitia Carson to Bessie Coleman. And so what would those students be losing in that transition?
Nothing. So I think the way that things get recalculated and that we look at, there's like 2 possibilities that could happen, and then there's also built-in systems within our school district that already support students that at schools that aren't even title, that are similar to the way that students are supported that way. And so when students would be shifting to maybe a different boundary or a different school, we will recalculate. And right now, all of our title schools are school-wide, which is at 40% or greater to be school-wide, which means that extra title funding supplements things that are that everyone in that school community benefits from. So it's not just students who are quote unquote title. It's like all students in the school-wide benefit from that extra supplemental pieces. So when students shift into another boundary or new school, when we recalculate, 2 things could happen. Another school could become school-wide that will benefit all students. And then if a certain percentage of students increase in that level of poverty at another school, we could qualify for targeted it like through title, which means like a certain set of group, or like it could be targeted for reading instruction, where it means a certain group would have extra support for reading in that way. The other pieces that we have built in across all of our elementary schools is that our MTSS specialists that provide reading support and interventions. So primarily our title support supplements more support for more assistance to support with reading. And so that's built in place already as a foundation. And then at title schools, there's added layers on top of that to support more because the higher number of students. And so when I say like things won't change, it's because we already have a mechanism built in place to meet the needs of students who need that reading support, regardless if it's title or not.
I'm going to opine here. From this information, well, before I opine, could you, my understanding, Parts A of Title I is school-specific, but also there's Title I district-wide, that no matter how students are allocated within, are boundaried within schools or enrolled within schools, you still get Title I funds for the district-wide, correct? So here's how I'm going to opine. I hate to draw analogy because anytime you draw analogy, there is mistakes or misinterpretation of it. I want to make sure that we care for the students where they are and provide them resources where they are. I don't want us to either, I don't want the consolidation process or the even boundary process for that matter be informed where we want to make a school qualifies for Title I or make a school disqualifies for Title I, because poverty informs poverty is a situation that requires us to invest in supporting those who are experiencing it wherever they are, wherever they live, and the circumstances that led them to experience that should be independent from how we decide which school they need to go to. And I feel the decision-making process in my mind personally is independent of how the outcome of the consolidation will support the students, and it shouldn't inform us because it is a Title I school or not. And it's just reassuring what the chair shared, that actually our schools are very close to each other in terms of their qualification. So I just want to reiterate what was shared and also say the decision making should be independent because we're going to support the students wherever they go, even if a neighborhood has a higher Title I eligibility or lower because of where they live.
And I think the percentage is not like whether or not somebody's Title I, it's percentages that are reported are students that are experiencing poverty. And that's why I was looking at the whole district, because I was like, okay, when I first looked at these numbers, I only looked at Title I schools, and I was elementary schools in particular, because I didn't look at the middle schools or K-8s because we're talking about elementary schools, or at the high schools for that matter. And I was kind of surprised, and I was like, oh, Adams is up there the same as other schools, right? And so that's when I asked, like, how do we designate which schools receive Title I? Well, who gets that designator? That was my question. And also, I was like, I thought it was 40% federally. So if that's the case, none of our schools are quote unquote Title I schools then, right? If it's at 40%, but that's not how it works, I found out. So I think the board needs some education on how it's determined by the district, honestly. And I don't know if the consolidation process is where that belongs. But what I did notice is that's really standing out to me is the citywide, district-wide issue of students navigating poverty is pretty high in all but one school of the elementary schools, and then that drops way down. But that says something about livability in this town, all these other things that we talk about all the time that I don't want to get into a side tangent about. However, that was noticeable to me, and that's why I think it's worth looking at. I have a whole little chart I made of it and everything, so if anybody's interested, let me know. But okay, maybe not everybody in town, don't email me at once though, okay?
I think the piece to add about Title I that is confusing if you look back historically is we always used to use, and a lot of people in this room are familiar with free and reduced lunch, and that's what we use to help determine that. And we've moved to the community eligibility program, so where like food is accessible to everyone in our community, and so that isn't the factor that we use to determine like our poverty rate or students experiencing or that level. So now there's like a multi-factors that go into play in that help determine that. So it's not as easy as comparing just two things. It's about like families experiencing homelessness. It's about just like other factors in there that all play in together. So direct certification through the state pieces that way is what helps determine that eligibility now. So it's hard to compare.
Go ahead, Chris.
Just to follow up on that, what you were saying, is that statewide where other school districts don't look at free and reduce, or is that just us?
It's any school district that's implementing that program of free meals to all students, which is pretty common at this point in time. So the state has some guidance for districts to follow regarding that. That has changed in the last couple of years. So yeah, that's the more common method.
I really like it.
Yeah. And I think it shifts it to more like the district is supporting students and not having to have students feel like they're a burden or feel like they're being outed. That's something I didn't like when that happened to me when I was in school and was experiencing things like living in a van or having to figure out what we're going to eat for dinner kind of vibes. I didn't like it when people found out because of a program label that I had, right? And so I think that's really important that we think about when we're talking about students in our schools, about we don't have to label them as, are you a title student, I wonder? You know, I mean, that doesn't feel good. That feels like, no. And I'm glad that this district is finding ways to support students across the district, no matter if they're at Bessie Coleman, who only has a 15%, but they still have 15% of students navigating poverty or experiencing poverty. And I think that's not worth erasing because they have a lower percentage. They still have students. So it's across the whole thing. And some have higher percentages, yes. And we also have students that transfer from school to school. We have sister schools too. And so there's a lot of factors, I think, that go into this conversation that makes me uncomfortable in trying to like distill it down on a student level of how many students with this designator are going here or there, because I don't want students to be exposed to their life circumstances that aren't their fault.
I don't, there's some, we should have a whole workshop on Title I. But what I want to say for community members listening is that the two things. One is that the standard for measuring poverty is ridiculously outdated. It does not capture the actual economic experiences of our community members. So overly relying on percentages of poverty to decide whether a school has a need does not capture what's really happening in the lives of those families for a calculation that's based on a formula from the 1960s, which is so missing the point of the real actual experience of the present economic situation. That I'm proud of our district, and this is the other thing I wanted to say, is that I'm proud of our district for implementing universal food. And I would like to say that the free and reduced lunch program has been a very poor proxy for the needs of a community for 30 years, maybe longer. And so moving away from that, it makes a lot more work for our district to figure out where are families' unmet needs, because we don't have this this single metric that we can say, well, this is how many kids qualify, therefore that's how many families need something. It requires them to do something that takes a lot more effort, which is the relationship building work of getting to know the families, the family advocates, the homeroom teacher, the person at the office who sees who gets dropped off and who gets picked up. It's that relationship building that is going to guide us in figuring out how to best support our families, not a Title I designation, not free and reduced lunch proxies, not the federal poverty line. That's not where it's going to happen. It's going to happen in the relationships. And to redirect us back to the task this evening, we are trying to deliberate to make a decision about how we're going to invest in those schools. And something that we have heard tonight is that there are proposals that will change the number of people that can see our kids every day. And I would like to make sure that we spend time talking about the staffing level, because those people are the ones that are going to build the relationships that are going to be the most effective poverty intervention that our community can manifest.
Is staffing one of our questions? Was that one of our topic areas?
No, because we jumped into the topic area before I was able to say the part about, I wanted to talk about the impact of staffing reductions across the models.
Do we have any more comments on Title I? Do you just want, since you started that, do you want, and then we'll shift over to another one?
Well, yeah, I mean, my question is just, can you talk about what will happen in the lived experiences day to day of our kids if we do no consolidation and we look at losing, 25 FTE? Was that the number? I don't have the chart up. Versus the first proposal, which reduces us by about 15, and the revised proposal, which reduces us by about 5. What is going to look different in the lives of the students if we do, be concise, of course, I realize, but because we could talk all day about what will be different, but what do you think is the most important thing for this board to consider about what will be different in the experiences of the students based on staffing level? What do you want us to know?
Well, we've continued to receive feedback from the community to make the cuts as far away from the classroom as possible. And I think that's the most concise way to explain the difference between as you move from the continuum of status quo to revised proposal. The status quo will impact the classroom the most versus the revised proposal that does not change class size targets or have much reduction to classroom teachers. So it's a pretty significant difference in that way. And I think that's probably the most concise way to put it. Do you want to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, I would add from the teaching and learning aspect of that, we're looking at not having blends, which is a huge factor in curriculum and teaching, to be able to teach at a rigorous level and not simultaneously teach more than one grade level at the same time. And we're looking at, in the revised proposal, more opportunities to restore and to look at how we can do 5th and 6th grade and 7th and 8th grade at a higher level than we currently could. The status quo, I think, for student programming would look about like it does now, with higher class sizes. It would also look like 6th grade being another 5th grade year, likely. And then the other initial proposal, I think, is also similar to that in the way, because there's not enough flexibility with the density of the schools.
One point of clarification: it doesn't mean we're never going to have a blend again. I think that's an overreach of what we're trying to accomplish, but we've also heard the concern about it, and we're trying to address it as best we can.
I think that's really helpful because one of my goals is to not have expectations that we're not going to be able to meet. And so thank you for pointing that out. Our time has expired that we allocated for this conversation. Does the board wish to continue discussion for more time? Add half an hour. Do we need to take a short 5-minute? I do need to use the bathroom. We need a 5-minute break. A real 5-minute break, not a 10-minute, 5-minute. Come right back. All right, we're back from our break. Thanks everyone for your patience. We were on which topic? Staffing. We finished
I think
staffing.
we finished that. Well,
Okay.
my question got answered. I don't know if anybody else had anything.
I think we talked about staffing earlier enough for any. What was our next topic?
I'd like to just talk a little bit more about finances and the budget, if possible.
Yes, and I don't want us to use the entire time on that.
Correct.
Can we do like split the time, and do we want to talk about finances now or after another topic? Transportation and
okay.
transportation's on there as well as, I think transportation and
Yeah.
transfers might go together perhaps.
Mhm.
Can we combine that topic? Is that okay, Bernie, if we do that? Okay. Transportation and transfers. Who had questions on that?
I have a comment, so I can wait, or I can share it right away.
You and Judah decide, because Judah also has one.
Go ahead.
One
One
comment.
I have two.
One comment.
I'm board chair, one comment.
It's about transfers and transportation.
Okay.
I can't combine them. So
It can be a combined sentence, there we go.
I would like to see in the revised proposal a commitment that no matter what school students want to enroll in, they will be provided with transportation, regardless of whichever school that's who they attend to. So transportation is afforded to students who attend any elementary, any K-8, any high school.
I would like to point out, Sammy, that that would be a policy revision that the board would have to make. I don't know if that would go in here because we would have to change policy first, right?
I'm not sure if it's in policy,
It is. It's in the transfer policy.
transfer policy.
Can I
Mhm.
ask a clarifying question?
Yes,
Sam?
please.
Are you saying that we would provide transportation to all of the locations, or that no matter which school they enrolled in, even on transfer, they would get transportation?
Correct. So probably the first side of the comments I should have said, I want us to commit to the same transfer policy that we have, which is basically applicable for every school district, school, including Franklin. And by that virtue, if the student is enrolled in a school, they are provided with transportation. So those who attend Franklin will be provided for transportation if they choose to go to Franklin, to make it equitable.
So in my planning process, we would provide transportation to every school, but not from every boundary to every school. So if that might, I'll address Franklin, because I think that's the one school right now that does not receive transportation.
And College Hill
And College Hill. Actually, we do provide transportation to College Hill
from
via,
a single site, right?
we provide transportation currently to College Hill by riding the bus to your home boundary high school, and we have shuttle buses that go to College Hill. So you can
Yeah.
ride your bus to Corvallis or to Crescent Valley, and there would be a bus that would get you to College Hill. So when I say Franklin, what the model would look like is if you lived in the Corvallis High School boundary, you could ride a bus to Franklin to get services at a K-8. If you lived in Crescent Valley High School boundary, you could ride to Mountain View to get services at a K-8. So transportation options available to a K-8 program, whether it be Franklin or Mountain View.
I think that suffices what I would like to see. And that's going to be in your planning process. Shall we adopt any consolidation model, correct?
Correct.
All right, I'm satisfied. Thank you.
That was, go ahead, because you asked questions too. Go ahead.
Since we're making comments,
Comment questions.
um,
This is also board deliberation too, so we're, yeah.
is there a commitment to continued community access to Wildcat Park at Letitia Carson?
Yes. That is a park. It's a playground on our school campus, and the intent would be to keep it open for community access.
And could that be a part of the revised proposal?
Again, it's your motion and your action. So if that's
I would,
I'm writing
I
a
mean, is
list and
that-
I'm gonna go over like the
Okay.
recommend, I have one already, so that I will write that there.
oh, thank you.
perfect.
And then my actual question is, what is the busing my assumption is, and correct me if I'm wrong, that all the students at Letitia Carson who would be going to Mountain View would qualify for a registered bus stop now in the transition.
I want to make sure I answer that I'm understanding. So any student who is in the Letitia Carson boundary and is routed to Mountain View for the 26-27 school year would get transportation to Mountain View. The answer is yes.
So they would all qualify for a registered bus stop.
Correct.
And so that's an additional about 90-ish students that would be taking the bus that aren't taking the bus now.
So we're averaging 80 to 90 students on the bus for Letitia Carson daily. About 40 of those are going to Boys and Girls Club. So I don't know the number of students that would be within that section going to Mountain View. So I don't know about 90. So I don't want to say yes to 90, but we would provide transportation to Mountain View.
But there would be a significant increase in students needing to take the bus who are currently in Letitia Carson, who would be routed to Catherine Jones Harrison, Bessie Coleman, or Mountain View.
We currently, anybody from Letitia Carson who is on the east side of 99 already has a bus provided for them. And that is the section that would be going to Mountain View.
And then all the students who live would be going either to Bessie Coleman or Catherine Jones Harrison, who currently live in the Letitia Carson School District, would also qualify for a bus stop.
If they're in, but not the Garfield ones that are going, because they would probably be within the. Actually, I did a math thing. This is a side note. Maps. None of the schools in that area are within a mile of each other, so I'm curious around that as well. Yeah.
Any students to Catherine Jones Harrison or Bessie Coleman that live more than a mile away from the school, which is the state mandated walk zone, would be provided transportation.
And so that's all of the Letitia Carson School District for any of the 3 elementary schools they'd be going to. They're not within a mile.
Not the ones in Garfield boundary, I don't think, because if they're on the north part, because it's a little bit over a mile between I was doing the math to figure this out a little bit too. I don't know how many students are going from Garfield that live over there, but if they live up there, they would be within a mile if they're on the upper part of the Garfield boundary, and then they would be within the mile to Catherine Jones.
To Catherine Jones Harrison, that little
slip, yeah.
So is there an estimate of how much additional cost it would be to add that busing?
It is tricky. I have not been able to put together an estimate. The reason being is that it's based on who registers to ride the bus for next school year. So it's difficult for me to predict exactly how many more buses, but what I would tell you is that transportation is 70% reimbursable, and there are not significant increases that would impede the ability to implement this.
Thank you.
Can we, just a couple other points about traveling to Mountain View. Byron, do you want to share about accessing for parents? Both through...
I can address that.
Okay.
I could address that. So one of the pieces that we have heard through community input or feedback is that there are families in the city limit who would then be attending Mountain View as their elementary school, and how would that impact families navigating poverty and their ability to access the school without public transportation. And what I want everyone to know is that we have access for families. So if a student is needing to come home early from school, we have a system already in place that we already utilize to get parents picked up and out to the school to get their student and home through Dial-A-Bus, our partner on transportation. We also have, is it Medline? Rideline to support students who are on IEPs to make sure that transportation services are available. But we provide transportation for families navigating poverty to access student and family activities at their school after hours, or or even during school hours for parents and families to be able to access those needs.
And there is a city bus stop on the side of Mountain View as well.
Oh, there is. I don't ride the bus on that side. I didn't. Yeah, that's good to know. My question was related to the bus, though. Mine too? Yeah. You go ahead. You go, Chris. You haven't talked for a while. I've been talking a lot.
my comment is that knowing staff very well, that, and I know this is a big concern for community, that if a child misses the bus and is a child of poverty, or any child, and there's no way to get that kid to school, I've seen principals, I myself in my old job, like office managers, counselors, people go and get those kids and get them to school, because everybody knows how important it is to have those kids at school. And if they don't have a ride, the school figures out a way and gets them there. And so and they're diligent about it. So
I just wanted to also add that navigating poverty does not equal not having transportation. It can, but it doesn't mean that always. And also, having a steady income does not always equal having reliable transportation either, because anything can happen to somebody's car. And if you don't have a decent savings and you lose your car, you don't have transportation all of a sudden. And so I just want to be careful how we even talk about these conversations in general, because it can feel isolating to families who may be on either side of those. Like, I have a car, what are you talking about? Or like, I'm not technically navigating poverty by the measures that are in place, and I have no transportation. So I want to make sure, like, and to Chris's point, that schools do figure it out for students so they can get to school. My question was around transportation for folk, regardless of their income status, that may be relying on public transportation in general. And if they are relying on that and they live on the northeast side of 99, that would go to Mountain View, would that be a consideration for if they requested a transfer, like if they to another school, or would it just go through the regular transfer request process? Are we doing any prioritized transfer around transportation for folk? Or because I know we did that for the students who wanted to go to the junior high instead of the K-8, right? From Sheldon. Or
Yeah.
there was discussion. That's operational, but I just had a question about that.
So they would still need to follow the transfer policy.
Okay.
Yeah.
But there wouldn't be any prioritization for them. Are we using the transfer policy where we even have to worry about prioritizing? Our people, I should say.
Yeah, we do follow that policy across all of our schools. If you want us to come back and have a conversation about that transfer policy, that's something we can definitely do.
Okay, so that'd be like sort of like what we were talking about earlier. Like maybe we can come back to this conversation.
Yeah.
I guess my question was more around like, is it maxed out at this point for transfers, intra-district transfers, where we even have to worry
to
about?
some locations and not all.
Okay, thank you. That was my only question around that, so I'm done. Okay.
Just on I think on the topic of things that it would be helpful to come back to later in community conversation around transportation. I know we've heard from a lot of folks that there's worry about shifts in transportation. There's worry about how long students are riding the bus or needing to ride the bus. And I know last year we had a meeting and actually had leadership from the transportation company that we work with come out and talk about what they're doing to address some of those challenges. But I think that for the community, as we move forward with any decision that's made, just thinking about how are decisions made, how are things monitored in terms of how many stops there are, how behavior and support is managed on the bus, as well as how long those rides are for students and how that's being minimized as well as possible in a safe way.
So far I have down more information around Title I, transportation and transfer policy as things that we're going to come back to in the future.
Thanks, Ryan. Good.
A logistics question about transportation with a K-8 that is a boundaried school. So right now our K-8's not boundaried, and we don't provide transportation as a guarantee for all of those households. Also, our middle school, our 6, 7, 8 right now, and our elementary don't start at the same time. So if we have a K-8 school that's boundaried, in terms of scheduling, are we talking about migrating them all to that schedule? Or are we talking about running transportation routes to the same location more than once a day, in and out, in order to keep the the difference in scheduling between elementary and middle school, junior high.
Wouldn't they follow the same one as the current K-8? Do they have different start times for the?
They do.
Okay.
And it's not an issue transportation-wise because the district's not responsible to transport. So I'm imagining that for sharing, as we've talked about across the district, having collaborative partners and such, that we would want to standardize the 7th, 8th grade experience. We would want to keep those kids on the same schedule as the junior high. So I don't know, I'm asking, how have you thought about this,
Yes,
and what's the idea?
I have. So the idea is that in order to provide transportation without engaging in a much more costly transportation system, is that we would align K-8s with our high school schedules, and we would share high school buses, which in most cases are not very full. And we would say front of the bus for K-8, back of the bus for high school. And the reason I would say that works is because if you have 7th and 8th graders who want to participate in after-school sports, then it gives them time to be transported to the junior high to participate with the junior high students in after-school athletics.
And I think if we're coming back to the transportation, Sammy's point around, because those are transfer students, right? For Franklin, they would end up with transportation, so that would be added into their mix if that happens in the future, which is separate than this conversation.
Meaning they would go to the high school schedule?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
That's what I was like.
I
It sounds like we need to have a longer conversation on this. That's outside of consolidation. Is there any other questions on transfers and transportation?
Quick one, maybe for Lauren. The reimbursability of transportation, my understanding, is different than the general purpose fund under the state school fund, meaning we're talking about transportation. Increase in investments in transportation is not going to take away the money that we take from the state for the classroom, correct? They're two different funds or accounts.
They come to us as a singular disbursement, but at the state level, it's two different pots of money that they set aside to fund that. So no, we wouldn't take away from general purpose dollars by having higher transportation expenses. So what happens is we report our transportation expenses to them, and they essentially pay us back for 70% of that, and that number is different district to district of how we're reimbursed.
Thank you.
I want to make sure we give Bernie time for questions as well before he has to leave. So go, Bernie.
Yeah, I just want to come back and to talk about finances a little bit. You mentioned, Lauren, that there's an exercise going on about a reduction in 2.5% to 5%, right? So if that happens, plan's gonna need to be adjusted. That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question, really, it's more a philosophical question, and for the board as well as for you. As a military planner, when we were taught at the very beginning of our classes is that the staff does not assume the risk. The decision maker assumes all risks with the decision that's being made. So, given that, what risks are you foreseeing we have to assume in both scenarios, one and the new enhanced scenario?
So the first part of the question and the potential for reductions at ODE mid-biennium, in my opinion, that is a situation where if we can't fund that ourselves, because we already have all of our staff under contract, right? And it's mid-biennium, it's a shift. That is a situation where you use the rainy day if you cannot fund it with excess fund balance. So that is a scenario. You guys asked me that a lot of what would be the scenarios where you would access that. So that's an adverse economic condition that we are not in control of whatsoever. So not saying I would necessarily come to you and ask for that if that's what happens, but that would be how we could handle that in the a fairly simple way. And I'm not quite sure that I understand the question. I just, on your second part, but I think if I am understanding, the risk is that if we go, well, I mean, I think the risks are pretty clear with the first scenario, is that is pretty impactful to the classroom and to student learning by having to increase class sizes. That's a risk of that proposal. It also sets us up in future years. We know that our costs rise every single year. That is a guarantee. There's not 1 year of financials where we don't have some sort of inflationary contract, whether that's, or inflationary impact, whether that's because of our collective bargaining agreements with staff or just the other, electricity costs, food costs, all of those things. So the compounding factor there is pretty significant, and we will be having harder conversations than we are right now very soon, depending on what we decide. So, and I know that right now that doesn't necessarily feel like it's even possible, but it will be, because that deficit will be larger. For the second, or that sort of applies to all of the scenarios, but I think with the revised proposal, it sets us up to be in the best financial position moving forward. That does not mean that we won't continue to have staff reductions, but as we've seen in several years prior to 23-24, we were able to handle those staff reductions through attrition, because our staffing was more aligned to the number of students that we have in our district, and those stayed really close together. And what happened is the staffing did not follow the same pathway trend-wise as our enrollment. And so if we are able to do this right sizing now to align those things, we anticipate that what we will see as we have decreased enrollment is that we will be able to decrease our staffing through attrition and be able to keep maintaining the programs that are being developed. Does that help?
Yeah, and so just summarize then, the new revised plan is probably the least risky of all the decisions before us, and it would set us up for some economic bumps that may come as a result of whatever the state's economic outlook and so on is, right?
From a financial perspective, yes.
Right, and that translates to stability in what you want to do, Byron,
and the student experience,
student experience and outcomes too. Mm-hmm. Right. Okay.
Yeah, and I think also we talked heavily during budget season about the impacts of the federal government, and I just want to be clear that those issues have not gone away right now. With ODE's revised budget plan or proposal, that feels more at the forefront, but we are dealing with both things still.
Yeah, thank you. I just didn't want us to get into a scenario where we're gonna have to do this again real quick, because external factors out of our control is forcing our hand. I'd like to see a very stable environment if we can, just for the student experience and outcomes.
And I think what we had talked about too during budgeting is there's this call to action for change with housing in our community and how that impacts families. And what we know is that the impact of that and changes to the housing system in the city, that will not have a direct impact like within 6 months, right? Like that's a more long-term impact that we'll have. And so when we look at the next several years, if we, regardless of what proposal, that also gives some time for more change to happen systemically in our community that hopefully in a positive way will then, I guess at worst case scenario, just level out enrollment, if not grow it.
Yeah, and I think Sammy had one, you have one, and Shauna has one, so we'll go like this. Yeah, go ahead, Brittany. Thank you.
Thank you. Your financial modeling assumes enrollment. Your enrollment forecast assumes all the development, projections that we have known of that is undergoing or that the council is forecasting, correct?
It took into account all of that information from January of 2025. And so I think it's important to point out that what we know is that it takes 5 single family homes to produce 1 student in our system, and it takes 4 multifamily units to produce 1 student in our system.
Thank you. And the proposal that we have, my understanding, you're sharing the revised proposal, which is within the viability, but with the maximum cost savings through consolidation. So if I ask you, give me the best proposal that could give us the most programs possible, but still does not overcrowd us. You shared prior that 2 elementaries, not viable from a capacity point of view next year. Any other configuration is not going to save us cost as much as this one. Is that correct?
Yes. In the current year and with the projected enrollment, this scenario with Sheldon Middle School and an elementary school is the only option that works to get us to the financial number.
Okay, and that's under all the assumptions you mentioned that we don't have control over, federal, mid-year cuts, etc. Knowing what we know, this is our best attempt financially.
Correct.
Thank you.
Judah, then Shauna, or Shauna, then Judah.
Given the frankly catastrophic financial outlook that we're looking at in a mid-year cut, is there any financial feasibility or path to Letitia Carson actually turning into an early learning center?
So the idea of the Early Learning Center is actually something that we've been working on for a few years in partnership with the ESD and KidCo, Head Start, and other programs in the community, knowing that that's a need for early intervention and early childhood education. And so we are already doing that in our schools now. So several of our elementary schools have Head Start classrooms. How that works is that we provide them the classroom space, but we don't charge them like a facilities rental cost. And they operate their program out of there, but it's their own program that's independent of the school district. It's just operating within our building. So the idea is that knowing that there's not enough spaces to serve all the kids that we would like to, would be if we were to dedicate a building for that use, that would be positive to the community. It's just an idea that has been in talks, and they are uncertain about federal funding for early childhood education, and then that will flow through. If that change happens at the federal level, it'll flow through at the state level, just like everything else. I can't say that much around supporting children is very solid right now as far as support through the entire system in our country. So it's hard to say what that looks like, but our risk in that is pretty low because it's providing them the space. And we already partner with these organizations on multiple different levels now. And that space is really would be set up well to receive those students. What we also know as part of the long range facilities planning is that whatever the decision is made, there was a commitment to then engage the community again on what we would use those spaces for. So that's an idea. It's not anything that would be set in stone. And that would go for the Sheldon space as well.
I'll try to, I'm still grappling with how to ask the question that I have. It's one that's coming from, I've heard from a lot of community about, in having asks around taking more time, really looking at which schools might close now versus later, and a lot of understanding that schools do need to close so that we can really maximize preserving people and how important those people are in buildings, even if those buildings have to shift. And I don't want to minimize losing a school community. We know how special they are and how important they are too. The question that I think I'm trying to come around to is, if we look at the revised proposal, we essentially end up with elementary schools and K-8s and a 7-8 program that are at their capacity. And positive things with that is that they are really able to put the most funds toward student experience, like really maximizing reductions in admin, which folks have asked for, increasing efficiency in that budget, and really looking at the best student experience possible. If we're facing uncertain budget situations and potential crises that are looming, and maybe we know other districts are as well, if we get to the point, and I know this may not be something that you can answer now, but thinking a year or two or even next year down the road and saying, ooh, what we're facing is still this huge deficit or a looming deficit, where does the next level of consolidation come from? So I think some of this goes to the question of, what does the long-term plan look like? So if with this consolidation, really one part of town gets kind of shored up in terms of this is the capacity, does that mean ultimately that any more consolidation at the elementary level then comes from essentially the remaining schools that maybe aren't at capacity? And I know that may not be a question that you want to get into answering right now, but I know it's a worry of the community of, if there's a pause, would a different plan come out that looks across all schools, or is this sort of a phasing of plans, or those that make the most sense at this point in time, given the numbers?
We're out of time for this extended time, so I need to ask the board how much time you would like to add and how much time is feasible to add for staff as well.
With the depth of this decision that we have to make pretty soon, I'm dedicated to be here as late as we need to. I do feel for staff, though. They have worked hard to get here, and so I want to be considerate of them.
Does the half-hour increment feel okay for folk?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, we're sort of at the needs of the board, so we're sticking around.
Maybe till 9 o'clock.
I was trying to make it easy for the clock thing. 25 minutes will be right after 25 minutes. Thank you. Okay, go ahead, Lauren.
Okay. Not to oversimplify things, but we are in a sort of unknown financial scenario every other year when we don't know our state funding oftentimes, and we don't know it in a time frame that works with the legal date that we have to have an adopted budget by. So we are constantly making assumptions and shifting those as we receive new information. So I don't want to sort of de-escalate how serious the funding situation is at the state and federal level. But as I've said many times through budgeting, this is just sort of part of the puzzle that we have to work with every single year as we go through the process. I will say that depending on the action that you take on Thursday, it sounds like that's still our timeline, will depend. That will set us up for how resilient we can be through any other outside factors at the state or federal level. I would also say that what we see in the birth rate data is that those numbers have sort of evened out in that about 300 to 350 range every year of kinders incoming. So what that tells us is that the number of kids coming in every year is fairly stable into our system, which in my head makes the decision of adding an elementary school onto the proposal a logical one. I think what we also know is that our classes still of that like 4th and 5th grade band are still higher than our kindergarten classes. So each year, there'll still be a little more space. So like if you're looking at, I think, the Mountain View number and them being at the 102% of proposed utilization, that will go down just a little bit and they'll feel a little more space there. So at our schools that may feel fuller, definitely fuller than what they've been used to, that number will even out a little bit. Does that answer your question? Or can I?
It doesn't fully answer. I appreciate
Yeah.
what you shared, and I think it doesn't fully answer just thinking about if deeper cuts are coming and we see the need for further savings through consolidation or savings of people through consolidation.
Mm-hmm.
If the schools that go through consolidation now, let's say, are sort of in a space of, well, they're already full. Students have had all of these transitions. They've already moved. They've already gone through this. There are schools that haven't, and I don't want to
Yeah.
bring up anxiety in other folks, but thinking about if deeper cuts in a year and 2 years need to be made, it seems like there would be.
I feel pretty confident saying that we would not be back here in a year talking about consolidating another elementary school. By making this change, it does stabilize the utilization of our buildings based on the factors that I mentioned.
I would add on to Lauren that that's the board's role too. So that wouldn't be like, that would be for us or potentially future folk, to make that call of which schools based on their recommendations, like we're doing right now, right? And so we don't know how everybody's gonna vote on Thursday. We're still talking and getting information and feedback. And so I would say, like, even at that, it would still be up to the board to make that decision. I just wanted to remind us of that it's not the staff that's saying, like, making the call.
Yeah,
They're
I
making a
appreciate that.
recommendation.
And I think it was coming also from just a place of knowing that there may be more cuts announced, mid-biennium cuts, and community saying, ooh, just wait a few weeks so we know what those are in case consolidation
That
needs to be
makes
deeper
sense.
right now.
So
It took me a while to get there in an eloquent way, but
So we won't know that until February, till the
Yeah.
short session. We will get a updated figure from the state economist, but we won't. What the department just went through was a process of identifying where they would potentially make reductions to hit the 2.5 or 5% overall reduction. But the legislature will decide based on that menu and the menu of other departments what cuts come. So that won't be something that the revenue forecast will show us in November. It will be the February short session where we would learn that.
Therese, then Judah.
So in that scenario, thank you for pointing out that what the legislature will be looking at is that every department in the state has been asked to submit a reduction plan so that they can evaluate where they want to make those cuts. It could end up not being that ODE that might not be where they decide to reconcile those issues. But hypothetically, let's say that they do decide that some amount of reduction needs to come from ODE, and that has a trickle-down effect. Are we in a situation where, or could we then be in a situation where come February we learn we're not going to have as much for 26, 27 as we thought, and the plan that we have put in place through reductions now is still not going to get the job done? What is the likelihood of a scenario where we could find ourselves back here saying, hey, we still can't make these numbers work, and now our schools are relatively full except for, because I think we have to say at that point there's only one school that we could look at to close where we could possibly absorb those kids into those spaces, and the community's been talking about this. And so is that an actual scenario that we need to think about as we're making a decision on Thursday? Do you think that I know you can't see into the future, but could a drastic enough cut come from ODE that becomes our reality?
Isn't that why we have reserves, though, for that?
Well, that would be, then we would have to we'd be discussing using the reserves, but that would, those reserves would be potentially, if the cut comes now, to get us through this year. So then we'd be looking at reserves for both the rest of this year and the 26-27 year. I don't know. Lauren, is that if a cut came, can our reserves carry us through? Let's go conservatively with the 2.5% reduction. Would our reserves allow us with this consolidation, the revised consolidation, to make it through the rest of 25, 26 and 26, 27? Do we have the reserves to do that?
With my crystal ball that I don't have, all of the scenarios that you talk about are things that could happen, right? What I would say is that our financial plan, our multi-year plan, has us ending this year with excess fund balance. So I would not anticipate that I would come to you, or I think Ryan has to come to you and ask for utilization of the reserve in 25, 26. What that looks like for 26, 27, there could be the potential to have to access reserves, but I think the probability of that is low based on our overall financial health, which is why, and I know saying financial health in a situation where we're talking about budget reductions and consolidation of schools is sort of ironic, but we have set ourselves up with those reserves to be able to handle some of these fluctuations. And so I'm not as concerned about the ODE reductions in the immediate future.
Okay, thanks.
Just a comment from the community at the Oregon School Board Association. We had a
No. You might need to use
issue.
use the mic next.
How about now?
Oh.
Wait. Yes.
Yep.
Yes. An extremely grim conversation with legislature.
No.
Okay. Thank you, Leo. Very grim conversation with legislators about the forecast for schools, and understanding that if we get even a 2.5%, and we don't get that till February, then they're essentially asking us to take one financial quarter of that year, because it comes at the very start of the last financial quarter of the year, to absorb a huge cut from the biennium budget. So to say that we would carry the excess, because we would be almost halfway through the biennium, we would have excess, but then we would run out of money early, because would. So it's a really, now is a
Your
great
mic's
time.
going in and out. So.
What?
I don't understand.
I have technology gremlins as I'm trying to request that now is a great time to be doing some statewide advocacy for education, because that's a particular area that is a catastrophic cut. And so please, we don't have control over that. My legislators know me on site because I complain so much. Please join me.
There are definitely going to be opportunities for advocacy with the state, and I don't think the state has money for education at this point either to add, but yeah. But I also don't want us to turn this into a budget meeting. And so I think if we have some financial that are related to consolidation, which I know it's hard to separate them, right? Because consolidation is about money, and the advocacy, budget processes, reserves don't feel like that's part of the combo right now. But yeah, I think all our mics, we've been talking so much, maybe. Are we back? Okay, cool. My mic sounds okay. How's your sound, Jada?
How's that?
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah. Thank you so much for fixing. Thanks, Josh. Chris, did you have your hand up?
Yeah. So I know you've talked a lot about finances, and we've talked about a lot of things, and everybody's asked really good questions. I guess I just feel better, especially with this room full of parents and families from Letitia Carson, to make sure we reiterate, confirm what a lot of the parents and community members have asked us, or we've received a ton of emails and then some with ideas and things like that. So I guess I just would feel better if I could ask you a couple questions that would just confirm where the decision that we're about to vote on Thursday. So we asked. The proposal of Letitia Carson came because it is the only one that takes care of the whole deficit. Is that correct? Or the biggest deficit that one school could.
Elementaries are pretty similar in terms of the reduction. What it does that we have tried to share with folks is that it brings those schools close to capacity, which then in turn does the things that Shauna spoke to earlier, in addition to the reduction, the overall cost reduction.
Okay.
Can I ask a connected question to that? Because it was, one of my questions was, can any of the other elementaries do this in the same way? I simplified my question very much from what I originally was in my brain, but it ties it to Chris's better.
You would have to go to doing a boundary adjustment with the understanding that you were going to be closing a school somewhere. And so you'd have to be starting with that and then doing a boundary adjustment. Because if you leave all the schools open and you do boundary adjustments, they just further diffuse the programming.
Okay, thanks.
And that would result in everybody across the board not knowing what's going to happen, and like it could change all kinds of possibilities for everybody. Is that correct?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then another question that we have received many times over is looking at, is it possible that we could expand our DLI programs back to allowing neighborhood kids to go, like Garfield kids to go back to Garfield? Is there any way to like I know there aren't enough third grade kids that are attending Letitia Carson that are Garfield boundary kids to make another classroom. But is it something that we can phase back in so that Garfield boundary kids could eventually go back to Garfield as a neighborhood school?
I'd have to go back and look at capacity. My initial thought is that would be difficult at Garfield because it's fairly close to capacity. It would be easier at Lincoln.
I would just add, students in the neighborhood, when they start in kindergarten, do go to the neighborhood school of Garfield and Lincoln. It's if students transfer in or move in after second grade where there's considerations if they attend or not.
Right, but I'm also thinking of the kids that are at Letitia Carson currently that would love to go back just to their neighborhood school. Is that a possibility to at least phase that back in? So, I don't know. It was just a minute.
I think one of the other questions was around like if Lincoln could be a K-8 too, if there's capacity or anything like that for that one. I think we went over this before, but I just wanted to ask because I'm glad you still have charts in front of you.
I think that's possible at Lincoln. I would need to go back and look at my stoplight report.
Okay.
One of the considerations, though, is staffing for DLI and being able, because we would still need probably the same number of staff at Linus Pauling to support the middle school DLI programming at Linus Pauling, and then to be able to hire more staff to support the DLI program if we added 7-8 at Lincoln. So while there's just some other pieces there that make it tricky.
Okay. We can't have comments from the audience at this time. Okay, so I'm trying to keep us focused on the proposals we're considering and if we can make adjustments to that. And so that was one thing I was kind of curious about, like if we needed additional steps, would that be something? I wouldn't want to throw that in at this point, probably, but I did want to ask if that was a possibility of turning into a K-8, if there was the infrastructure support. Other questions? I have more other questions that's not financial. And are we done with financial?
I just want to summarize something about financials.
I think we transitioned away from financial too. Yeah.
Can I just provide a comment I think is important for the community to be aware of as we navigate these steps and next steps? I try to conceptualize it a lot, and the best way to think about it is 2 columns. The more we think about building density, the more that we can think of more programs, because we're not spread too thin. The less, the more diffused our buildings are, the more buildings we have, the more diffused our programs are. And that's what we're trying to figure out. More buildings, more opportunities for less buildings, more opportunities for programs. More buildings, less opportunities for programs. And that's what the $4 million or less that we can do consolidation with, we can work with. The challenge is, when we talked about state funding, is the ground that we're going to stand on. So when we decide, whatever we decide, how many buildings we want to keep and how many buildings we want to consolidate, and based on it, when the budget comes, because of that, we can either have more programs or less. That depends on a solid ground from the state. So I really hope when the community members who wants to keep those programs alive next year, when they go to the state legislatures and ask them to invest in funding, they tell them, keep the grounds high, don't reduce the funding, because if they reduce the funding, we're still going to suffer. So these are 2 different things. Eventually they impact the kids. And what I'm really fearing is we do the consolidation, we have an opportunity for our programs to be there, and then the state says, cut. The more they cut, no matter what we do in our building, we're going to have the challenge. So really, I hope that we're not losing that idea that when you go to the legislature, you say, on October 10 and October 13, the board decided to save as much money as possible, to preserve as much programs as possible. But that depends on the legislature actually keeping the ground solid. And I really hope that we can carry that in our conversations moving forward, that this is only about the $4 million, but the entire budget depends on the state keeping funding us.
Thanks, Sammy. I had a question unrelated to finances. I had 2 more questions. Are we okay if we move? Does anybody else have questions about supporting students with IEPs and 504s? Did anybody else have questions around that? I know you already mentioned, Byron, that students, their services and their support follow them. It's not like that's going to go away. It was more about if there's any, would there be positive changes versus losses? And if there, because there wouldn't be losses because we wouldn't cut their services. Are there additional positive changes that could help students with IEPs and 504s through consolidation?
So it's hard to speak exactly to how that could look, right?
Mhm.
Because there's so many just different variables in that. But the pieces in there that could become possible is when there's higher density of staffing, right, and there's more staffing, there's opportunity for more collaboration. And so that could also happen not just within our general education teachers at grade levels, but also with our specialists. Right now, we do have specialists like our speech language pathologists who provide services to students on IEPs who are split. Some work in 3 buildings, some work in 2. And so in this, that would potentially shift some of those pieces where folks could be maybe stationed in more, like mostly in a building possibly. That could help with that collaboration and work for students. So there could be gains there. The other thing that we have at some of our schools right now, and there's possibilities of looking at our models, is called an interventionist model. That could be a possibility when we look at our programs. And an interventionist model is where there's a case manager who does paperwork for all of the school, and there's interventionists who are certified teachers who teach the skills that students need that are based on their IEP. And in that, there are benefits to that are different than the traditional model, which is a special ed teacher that does both the paperwork and the teaching. And so there's both advantages to that could be possibilities too. So there are possibilities in that as well.
All right, thanks. Is there
Can
anybody
I-
else?
Can I add to that?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Again, thinking about the K6 and K8 model, also thinking about sort of those developmental stages for students, and thinking about a K8, which would limit the number of transitions a student may have in their school career. There's some potential benefit there as well.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else on that topic? I had a question about the name and a commitment to Letitia Carson's name. So I can send that, but I just wanted to run it by the board too. Seeing a little bit stronger language in there of keeping her name connected to the district. Should we vote to approve the revised proposal in a way that works directly in community with her direct descendants, the Letitia Carson Legacy Project, the Oregon Black Pioneers, and the Lynn Benton NAACP on how to best honor her name through CSD buildings and programming should we close the school. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And I wanted to see how you all thought or felt about that.
I support it.
Okay. Other questions? Were there other topics? We're on our time again as well.
Sorry, we talked about next steps, that we were going to talk about that, but maybe that's an after.
That was, we were going to come back to that. I want to summarize some of the topic things too for us to think about. You have another question? Go ahead. So if there's other folk that have other questions, I'm just double checking my questions because some of them already got asked in different ways. I have a one-off. Go ahead.
Under the current plan, how will the students at Mountain View have the same opportunities for specials and electives as Linus Pauling, considering there's going to be a tremendous size difference? You've addressed sports and after-school activities, but during the school day.
So that is part of the philosophy around the banded grades of looking at what's consistent across our district for opportunities for K4, what's consistent for opportunities for 5, 6, and then what's consistent for opportunities for 7, 8 across. And that's the work that our innovation team is actually currently working on to see what we can develop that has the same level of access between those 3 banded levels of grades across all levels.
So is there a commitment to say, like, they're going to have the same opportunities in types of science programming and access to science equipment, field trips, things like that?
Yeah, so it's, so yes, because the part of that planning in those pieces are like, what are the core areas that we're committed to, and then what does the delivery of that content in those core areas look like? So that'd be the similar access to those pieces.
I mean, there might be some variation by elective. One of the things that we want our teachers to be able to help us with is identify what electives they want to teach. And sometimes those things vary year to year based on student interest, based on staff interest. So there may be some variation there.
And currently there's variation between our middle schools on the electives that are offered as well.
Go ahead.
Just to follow up with that, but we do have a few standard things that a 6th, 7th, 8th grader right now can do. One of those is orchestra. One of those is sports teams that are sponsored by their school. So are we committed to integrating the K-8 students from Mountain View into having access to, well, particularly orchestra, I think is the music is the big one. For me and 6th graders, we've taught, I think I sent this question in that the loss of a year of education in an instrument is the difference between having and not having a band or advanced classes in high school. So moving 6th grade back to elementary, we need to protect that access, but we'd also need to protect it at 7th, 8th. So where are we on the thinking about, well, where is that falling on your priorities for how we're going to make sure that those kids aren't missing out 6th grade and Mountain View?
We're continuing to work towards that. One of the things that I want to be clear about is that no proposal is perfect. And we have come back to you with, but based on the direction you've provided, and we're going to do our best to provide every opportunity to our kids in our schools and to make our schools continue to thrive. And that's our commitment, and there's work to be done, and we need to have an answer so we can start that work.
My question sounded grumpier than I meant it to because it's late and so yeah, I think that actually, Ryan, you're highlighting the point, which is that every day that we put off figuring out what we're going to do makes it harder for you guys to figure out how you're going to keep or expand services. And I think I'm hearing that there are things that are possible to do. If we give you the time to do them, they could happen. And so it would be really helpful if we could land somewhere and give you the ability to start figuring those things out.
And my response may have sounded grumpy too. If it did, I apologize. I just want us to understand that we have to manage expectation, and we also have to understand how hard this is, and that we will do the best that we're able to do as people who care about kids, and that's all we can offer.
I do want to also point out that the board never decides what electives are at any of the schools or what programs or what sports students have access to, because that's operational. So we can ask questions to clarify from the community, but I want to make sure the community knows and the board remembers those are outside of the scope of board role and responsibility and things that we have access to make decisions on. Just so it's super clear for folk that we're asking for clarity for folk that are wondering, not because we can actually do anything as a board for that, but to help bring messaging to the district staff is important. And I had a question, or do you have one that's related to that?
No, unrelated.
I had an unrelated question because we've had a couple questions about water quality at Mountain View, and that's actually something that's really important to me and things that I do at my professional work a little bit too. So I had a question about that, like what's up with the water quality? And if there are some issues, oh, I lost my question. I had them typed ahead of time and everything. If we approved it, would we need to address any infrastructure stuff at all? So that's kind of my question was about that.
So the water quality, so first of all, Mountain View Elementary School is on a well, has been since its inception, and it is in compliance with Oregon Health Authority's community drinking water program. So it has its own system that is monitored by Oregon Health Authority, and it is in full compliance. All those results are listed on OHA's website, and I'll be sending that back out through the FAQ process. We also comply with the Oregon Department of Education's lead in drinking water program, and so we test in compliance with the ODE requirements. It is scheduled for a full building testing in the next couple months here. And so we are testing, but every test that we have had has been mitigated and is in full compliance with that. When we did major renovations during the bond program, every fixture that was touched with the bond program was tested and is in full compliance. We replaced every fixture that was touched with a lead-free fixture. And so we do, through the community drinking water program, we do coliform, lead, copper. We test at the water source as well as at the distribution location. So I don't know. If
So
there's-
it wouldn't increase a bunch of water being transported to Mountain View?
No, and I did see some notice about the sulfur level in the water. So the aquifer out in that area does have a higher rate of sulfur, which is not, it's not unsafe, but it is less palatable. And so back in, I believe it was 2003, we put a reverse osmosis system in, which actually feeds all of the drinking water locations in the building, which addresses the palatability of the water.
Okay, thank you so much for clarifying.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to bring up Franklin because I've heard quite a lot in the community that it feels like that's just been ignored rather than addressed. And something that I've really been reflecting on in terms of our role as a board is the position that we have to be able to come back and ask questions that the community may not have access to, or to be able to see and come back to you with the questions of the community and see how deep the planning and thoughtfulness has been, and also to help look for holes in that thinking, or to bring those questions forward that might help us look for where we have more learning to do or more work to do. And in terms of Franklin, I know there have been a lot of questions around Franklin being a school of choice in the community. I heard today that there's thoughts around, just wanted to confirm this, around transportation for Franklin, because I know that even though it's open lottery for folks to be able to transfer in, not having transportation is a huge barrier to who can do that. And so I really appreciated hearing that, wanted to bring that back. And then I know that in our ask for an elementary school, Franklin technically is a K-8 program, it has an elementary school. So I don't know if it was in consideration there or not, but I've actually heard quite a lot of looking at data around why Franklin would not have the same impact in terms of helping bring other schools up to capacity, in terms of overfilling the 7-8 program at Linus Pauling to capacity, and would contribute to more blended classrooms. I just wanted to bring that back up, or just confirm with the district in terms of, I know some of the deep looking at those numbers would be, if that program was or had been considered along the way, because I think that's something the community's been asking just to hear about openly, and has felt like there hasn't been a lot of conversation about that.
So in the slide deck sorry, I'm getting tired. The slide deck I provided on October 30th, it showed with Franklin, it showed both that at the 7th and 8th grade, that would take Corvallis Junior High beyond capacity in that proposal. At the elementary level, it has one classroom per grade. In that slide deck, I also showed how many kids at each grade level at each one of the schools, and that doesn't necessarily bring us closer to capacity in that chart.
Thank you.
Other questions, Sammy?
It's related to capacity. Back to the capacity table. The initial calculation is basically enrollments of how many bodies can be in a building, and then the adjusted one is programmatically, and we want to have 90% ideally. Now we call that number 100%. And what you mentioned is that we need to have some flexibility because we will have some blips ups and down. And there is immediately number one, the first year, a 102 or 101%. My understanding that still we can achieve programmatic success with somewhere between 1 and 109%, assuming the 90% formula. What is the range of acceptability in terms of don't go higher than this? that higher than 105 or 100%. So we're not overcrowded, or we can't really deliver on programs, and try not to be less than a certain percent. So we're not spread too thin. Is there a range that you advise based on your?
Not necessarily. The target capacity by level is based off of an organization that I don't remember the name at the time. Your mic's on.
A4LE, Architects for Learning Environments.
And so those capacity numbers are based on a bunch of other research done by outside organization. And so those are the targets that we have set. I can't tell you a range, X percent to X percent of what necessarily would be our ideal. Our ideal is as close to 100% as possible to be able to do the programming. And as a reminder, just because we look at the budget as an overall picture, and so then we provide staffing on our basic level, the first pass of staffing equally across schools, and then we start adding on additional staffing and funding based on the actual student population, and these calculations are all based on just that base level staffing, not the other layers that are scaffolded on. So I don't believe none of these numbers, as far as the capacity, I think impact programming in a negative way.
Perfect, thank you.
Go ahead, Trace.
So I just was reviewing the Franklin numbers around the conversation about capacity. So if sixth graders, if you were to close Franklin, the 55 sixth graders would go, well, the incoming sixth graders would go back to their home schools, right? So we wouldn't have to disperse the existing sixth graders, because they would become seventh graders. They would go to either Linus Pauling or to Mountain View. So I'm estimating that approximately 11 of the current sixth graders would go into Mountain View by their boundaried school. And for easy numbers, let's assume that probably about the same number-ish would go. We'd be looking at about 20-ish seventh and eighth graders that would be redirected to Mountain View, which would leave us out of the 108, about 89 90 that would need to go to Linus Pauling. Linus Pauling cannot take an additional 90 kids. Is that correct? Because it would put it over not just the target utilization, it would put it at basically at the we can't put more bodies in this building utilization.
Can you turn on your mic?
It's over what?
Target.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? My last question was around, sorry, let me look at it again. In thinking about possibilities, what have you heard, if anything, as concerns from staff? And also, what about areas of opportunity or excitement have you heard? Because I think it's important that we hear about both of those things when we're considering this.
Yeah, I think so. One of the things with our innovation team where there's been excitement is envisioning the knowledge and skills and characteristics we want every student to gain in our school district. And so we're working on that the profile of a graduate or the profile of a CSD student right now. And I know there's lots of you have been involved in different areas of that too. And so that is an area that I think is creating some energy and like positivity of thinking around what do we want students to gain, and then how do we do that. The other pieces around our innovation teamwork is excitement around the those grade bands and what those could look like, particularly around elective opportunities and what teachers are excited about teaching. I know I've heard from a few different teachers, both at middle school and elementary, that have talked about excitement. Heard from some, I don't want to say this because I don't have permission to say what they shared, but people at other levels who have said, I've always wanted to teach this, and I think in this model I might get to do this now. Or I went to school, really wanted to do this, but here's where I got a job, and maybe I have an opportunity to go back to this grade level and do this thing now. Or I've also heard excitement from some teachers on, I've always wanted to just teach reading all day long, and I hate teaching math, or I want to teach math all day long and I don't want to teach reading. And so there's opportunities in that our staff haven't been able to do because of our models of haven't allowed that flexibility. So I think that is some of the excitement that I'm hearing from folks.
Thanks. Okay, any last, I'm gonna do a little recap. So what I heard as some language that needs to get potentially developed for consideration is something about the high schools based on our conversation. It's something about Wildcat Park access based on our conversations, and something about Letitia Carson's name based on our conversations. Did I miss anything?
Probably just it's for the leadership commitment to bring back the transfer and transportation policies.
That is outside of that is on notes, yeah, for a future conversation, yeah. That would not be on any kind of languagey kind of stuff, so, yeah. But that I did have that written down, yeah.
I just want to bring back also the discussion about caring for our kids
Oh, yes.
through the transition, and making sure that we, and staff, and helping them through that process, and also like the plan moving forward, all of that. How to help the schools taking kids, welcoming kids into their schools. How are we going to do that?
I think that's an important consideration regardless of what happens, because this has been a impactful conversation across the district.
Well, and we know from past, when this happened before, there were two definitely different ways of doing it, and there was some really positive outcomes when we looked at the transitioning process starting in the spring, not in the fall. And so staff that were moving to another school were part of our staff meetings. They did lots of different activities that would just really help each other get to know each other. And then one staff opening their doors and saying, you know, what is the best way we're going to make you feel welcome into our school? Like, do I need to give you my classroom? Do you want this classroom because it's, you know, however, just little things like that, and setting it up so that staff feel good about it. And then, of course, our kids there's some different ideas I think we can look at to help our kids transition. But they need to start in the spring.
Thanks, Chris. Sammy?
In the spirit of the next steps, I believe the topic of oversights or updates, I know Ryan will do that because he's done it through the bond updates. I want us to have frequent updates how the transition is happening. It's the trust and verify, transparency with the community, how this is happening. We need to share with the community how close are we to make whatever decision we make a successful decision. So maybe embedding in the resolution or the motion, if we would consider one, frequent updates on transition progress that could inform us about challenges the district is facing or possible policy decisions the board may need to take as we progress. I believe that would be something I would love to see a language on.
Okay, and I just want to make sure that nobody's confused with this conversation, that nothing has been decided.
Correct.
And so my comment about there being some care, no matter what happens, I feel like needs to happen. And so that's where I want to make sure that's super clear, that we're not making a decision tonight. And we have one more meeting in which we'll be having discussion, and I want to make sure that the board is still on board. That sounds weird. I'm getting tired too. Oh no, I'm facilitating. I can't get tired. That the board is still in agreement with our established timeline for some kind of decision, regardless of what that is, on Thursday. And I see Laura has her hand up.
Are we also going to change the language in planning for the high schools in the proposal?
That I had language about the high schools.
Okay,
Yes,
cool.
that was the first thing on my.
Okay, cool.
And then it was high schools, Wildcat, the name are the three things I have written down. Is that true though about the timeline?
I've been very clear about my position to this point, but hearing what needs to happen with staffing, that we need to make some kind of decision on Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. I agree.
I agree as well.
I agree.
Okay, so that I wanted to make sure we were clear on that part, because we hadn't said that for our expectations for our meeting on Thursday. And
Lou, do you feel comfortable just after this conversation, just kind of recapping that in terms of the decision, what is in front of us to decide? Like, we have the don't do anything, the close only Sheldon, like, would it be helpful if or do we just leave that for Thursday?
we leave that for Thursday because somebody's going to have to make a motion of some sort on Thursday, and I don't want that discussed. I do not want that discussed during this time at all.
Chair,
Yeah.
maybe we need to, in light of our working agreement, I just want to make sure we have a commitment to each other and the community of no surprises. So, for example, you just summarized the possible modification on the two proposals or no proposal at all that we want to consider, and we exhausted all possible options, or if there's any option we just want to elevate it now to share with the community. These are the things that we're considering. Is that fair thing to share with the
there's
community?
three things we've been talking about this whole time, like do nothing,
Mhm.
which is an option. The other one is, I don't think we would be voting on the original one because we asked for a revised proposal and have not asked to go back to the other one, but I might be misinterpreting the process. However, that option is still there, so that could be something that somebody puts forward. So I don't want to get into, like, I don't know if this is making sense right now.
It does.
Okay, it's just hard because I feel like we're actually moving towards a conversation around deliberating towards a motion, and that's not this meeting. We have already noticed the community that we will be doing that on Thursday, and I just wanted to make sure that was the timeline we were sticking with and everything.
Chair,
Yeah.
may we also share our commitment again with the community? We're still accessible through phone calls,
Yeah, of course.
mail, email,
Yeah.
personal meetings, and public testimony on Thursday.
I do want to be transparent with the community that some folk may have more availability than others between now and Thursday. And so just know that. But you can still call us and text us and email us and request meetings and stuff like that for sure. Yes, Shauna.
Just on the lines of care with the community, I know we've had asks a couple of times from folks around a town hall or some type of Q&A discussion. I know that could come just through individual conversations with the board or other, but just something for us to think about at some point moving forward, regardless of the decision that's made. Just in terms of having that chance. I know last year I heard from so many community members how valued that time was to be able to have back and forth conversation, to have questions answered, to hear updates in real time that felt really collaborative. So we'd just love to put that idea or make sure it's still held as
I like that idea
possible way
too.
to just
Mhm.
show care and continue collaboration with the community.
Okay. Are we done talking about the?
No, I'm sorry. I just need to get, so on Thursday, someone's going to make a proposal and I'm Sammy, was your question, were you asking the board to agree to limit what they would consider as a motion?
Kind of, yes. What's the range of options we're thinking of, which is all the way from no consolidation to proposal 1 to proposal 2, or the modification and any modification of the modifications that the chair have summarized. Is there anything else we might be considering? So yes, are we committed to maybe that's the kind of proposal, because yes. So yes. That's the limitation that I'm thinking of. Are we committing to that limitation or not? And either way, I just want to elevate that today.
I'm not
so the
even
community
sure if
knows.
we should talk about whether we're committing to that limitation, because I feel like that would mean we're effectively discussing the proposal. So I think someone's going to make a motion on Thursday, and then we're going to vote, and we'll have discussion, and then we'll vote. And then I suppose if the motion that is made does not pass, we will have to figure out what we would do.
Sure.
But I think it would be probably not the greatest practice to say we're going to agree that there are things that board members would not decide to include in a motion right now when we haven't entered into deliberation about a specific motion. Does that make sense? I don't know. Now I'm getting tired and I'm stumbling over my words. So yeah.
No, that's fair. Just to make sure we're communicating with the community, all options are on the table. We discussed our criteria. We discussed the options that we wanted to dig deeper into, and any motion could be proposed, and we will debate it in front of the public as well. And that's still fair. Just want to make sure we share that as well.
Is that clear for everyone? Okay. With no further business, that was our only business. And thank you for staying, staff and community, for an additional hour and 4 minutes beyond our hour and 34 minutes, excuse me. Meeting is adjourned at 9:34 p.m.